I love video games, you love video games, so in an industry forever concerned with blockbuster hype machines, let's break down some of the most pointless and awesome details you really don't need to know, but will tell as many people about as possible. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and these are 12 pointless video game details that will blow your mind. Number 12. NPCs call relatives if they see something horrible. IO Interactive are the modern-day Bethesda in terms of creating believable, interconnected clockwork worlds full of NPC animation cycles and various responses to whatever you decide to do. Case in point, NPC reactions. The majority are resigned to freaking out or running for cover if all hell breaks loose, but IO included a number of lengthier phone calls triggered by some characters stumbling upon dead bodies. One involves a businesswoman failing to connect with a friend after finding a murder scene, then ranting about how there's a serial killer on the loose. Another, located on the Paris map, sees a handyman call his mother, saying he needed to hear a friendly voice that could calm him down after coming across a corpse you've left behind. There's a whole set of animations for bodies being dragged away and locations being cleaned up and reset depending on how you're playing, but this being a stealth game, it's super easy to miss all of this. Number 11. Some insane armor detail. Halo 3. Bungie's work on Halo will forever remain the stuff of legend, but did you ever use Halo 3's theater mode to zoom around and really take in the art department's hard work? You'll realize the map Valhalla has a rotation of wall messages that change depending on the time of year, but zoom into a Spartan's armor and you'll find a level of detail reserved just for you. Seeing armor plates scuffed and marked from battle, this additional texture doesn't even fully load until you're all the way zoomed in. It shows Bungie knew people would be using theater mode to get more up close and personal than ever with their soldiers, and they decided to reward you for it. Number 10. Give Snake a shaver and he'll shave. Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. Hideo Kojima is the king of pointless game details, a crown he earned with Metal Gear Solid 2. Seeing scores of head-turning randomness included in the launch trailer, we watched Snake shoot pages out of magazines, put bullet holes in different enemy limbs, or tip over an ice bucket and watch the cubes melt in real time. While this tech demo feel is largely resigned to the tanker area, the Big Shell does have a doozy while you're playing as Raiden. Triggered by acquiring the shaver item and giving it to solid Iroquois Pliskin Snake, he'll then appear shaven for the rest of the game, including all cutscenes and even his codec model. Snake kinda looks patently worse like this, and there's no way to get him to sprout some face fuzz after the commitment, but if you prefer a cleaner cut character, go for it. Number 9. Puddles evaporate over time. Horizon Zero Dawn. Spider-Man might have spawned Puddlegate across 2018 thanks to puddles that differed in size from trailer to gameplay, yes, really, but just 1 year prior, puddle tech was on full display in Horizon Zero Dawn. Similar to how GTA 5 also features small bodies of water that evaporate over time, Horizon's weather storms will leave behind puddles that slowly fade away if you stand around and watch them long enough. The definition of a pointless game detail, it's still a cool way to convey the passage of time if you're out on a hunt long enough. Number 8. Tinted glasses add a filter to first person. Grand Theft Auto 5. Okay, I said Hideo Kojima was the king, but maybe with the billions made from GTA, Rockstar can stake a claim to the random details throne. Coming amongst the millions of tiny things GTA 5 does to get across its impeccable production, turns out when Rockstar went first person for the PS4/Xbox One upgrades, it was more than just a perspective switch. See, if you wear any pair of glasses with a colored tint, flick to first person and this tint will be reflected through your character's eyes. Even better, after about a minute or so, the tint will start to fade, representing your character adjusting to the color the way our own eyes do. Never let it be said that Rockstar haven't thought of everything. Number 7. Max can learn piano throughout the game. Max Payne 3. Max Payne is one of gaming's best written characters, and though at the time we weren't ready for Rockstar's extension of Max's core nihilism, the third installment is easily one of their finest works, and arguably the best playing of the trilogy to boot. In regards to Rockstar knowing they were stepping into the shoes of giants though, Max Payne 3 might have ditched the lone piano theme from Remedy's original games, but it does make a return if you know where to look. Triggered across a series of pianos Max can optionally interact with, throughout the campaign he'll play the wrong notes or otherwise not remember how the theme's supposed to go until eventually bringing it all together in the final act. Payne refers to this theme as the soundtrack to my life, and it's only when Max has shaven his hair off and truly stopped caring about being anything other than a dime store angel of death that he's quoted as achieving some actual harmony. To this day, Max Payne 3 features one of Dan Houser's best scripts, but with the game not even available on backwards compatibility, very few people have experienced it firsthand. Number 6. The original Doom Guy skin has scars from 1993. Doom Eternal. An incredible detail noticed by Redditor Defective Pikachu, id Software really went all out with fan service in Doom Eternal. Besides the story neatly knitting together all the games so far into one incredibly satisfying canon timeline, equip the original Doom Guy skin and the art department went one better. Though you'll have to have an insane knowledge of the original title's box art to notice in the first place, look to Doom Guy's left arm and you'll see the scars directly correlate to when he was grabbed by a demon in 1993's artwork. External story goes to great lengths, mostly through elaborate text entries, to confirm that the original Doom Marine eventually became the intergalactic slayer we know today, and this just further proves it. Number 5. Keanu Reeves is in the audience. CarX Drift Racing Online. Keanu Reeves might be one of the hardest working and nicest people in Hollywood, but for a little while he was just known as Sad Keanu. Coming from a random paparazzi shot catching him half eating a sandwich before looking at the ground, this meme went on to be included in a million different contexts, including CarX Technologies' CarX Drift Racing Online. Spotted in a variety of locations as one of the many repeat crowd models used to populate tracks and outdoor areas, nowhere to look and you can spy Keanu still enjoying his sandwich, but finally with some company. Number 4. Arthur Morgan's Ears. Red Dead Redemption 2. What do you do when you've got access to millions upon millions of dollars in cash, a total that only seems to duplicate with each passing year? Well, if you're Rockstar, you set about crafting one of the most hyper-detailed video games of all time. Practically VR without a headset, play Red Dead Redemption 2 for any length of time and you'll pick up on everything from clothing wear and tear to real-time facial hair growth, trails left from boots in the mud to merchants getting wooden legs if you shot them a week before. In a race to find the most insanely tiny detail though, I present to you the subsurface scattering of light through the most inconsequential of objects. Namely, how ears in Red Dead 2 glow red when backed by a light source. The same technique can be seen in Naughty Dog's more recent Uncharted titles 4 and Lost Legacy 2, both showcasing a level of technical craft that's honestly just showing off at this point. Number 3. Mario 64's artwork is inside Zelda's castle. Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Not content with literally inventing the very way we perceive 3D space when locking onto enemies and maneuvering around them, Ocarina of Time routinely blows minds with new secrets uncovered where you least expect them. One of these can be found right at the beginning of the game when visiting Zelda's castle. Simply take a peek inside one of the rooms and you'll spy a collection of artwork carried across from Mario 64. Featuring a handful of the main cast in super low res, brilliantly in the 3DS remake of Ocarina of Time, this window was updated to a more modern Mario wallpaper, complete with warp pipes. Number 2. Two-Face's exposed veins actually move. Batman Arkham Knight. Yep, today in things you'd rather not see but can now not stop staring at, Redditor Current Beyond recently shared footage of the unconscious Two-Face after you've taken him down, lying with pulsating veins repeatedly bulging in time with his heartbeat. It's a staggeringly effective attention to detail, grounding the reality of this Christopher Nolan-ized take on the character, as he really is someone who's had half their face scorched off and just has to live with the consequences. And number 1, you can queue and enter the club like a normal person. Hitman 3. Back to Hitman for the top spot because again IO Interactive are absolute wizards when it comes to fully immersing you in a given playspace. Hitman 3 features some of their most intricate levels yet, and once you fire into the ludicrously fun Berlin nightclub level, where you're tasked with taking out 5 or more targets using whatever methods come to mind, it's easy to ditch any sense of decorum and go postal with a fire axe. If you do the exact opposite though and literally play by the rules, you can actually stand in the queue and get into the nightclub in real time. It takes around 45 minutes to eventually gain legal admittance into Club Hall, where you'll be given an entry pass and even some phone stickers to cover your lens, because this club doesn't want the outside world knowing what they're up to. Point being though, if you just want to be a nice little hitman and wait your turn before cleaving someone's face in with a fire extinguisher, feel free.
Now, game developers have a very unenviable job, as creating good games is nowhere near as fun as it seems. The amount of blood, sweat and tears that go into making even a small indie title is more than most could handle, and as such, it's utterly inspiring when devs bring a level of detail to productions that no one even asked for. And that's what we're here to talk about today. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 incredibly accurate video game details. Number 10. Thermal sights don't work whilst looking through a window. Call of Duty Warzone. Call of Duty is a franchise known for its tight shooting, fun campaigns, as long as you ignore early Modern Warfare 3 remaster reviews, yikes, and its ability to make kids think that they could handle a real battlefield. Spoiler alert, you will die very quickly. Just saying. One way the franchise achieves its high level of immersion is through the attention to detail put into its weapon arsenal. COD Modern Warfare Warzone has a shiny example of this, as one gun attachment displays a realistic detail that many weren't actually aware of. In the game, you can use a thermal hybrid scope to help pick off enemies with heat imaging. However, if you try to look through a window, you'll notice the sight is completely gone. Is this some sort of bug? Well, no, actually, it's an accurate representation of thermal sights. Heat imaging is an impressive technology, but it doesn't work through glass. Including this in the game was a clever way to keep things real and teach players about the limitations of modern weaponry. Number 9. The toilet seat. Prey. Okay then, lads, it's time to talk toilets. Now, there's an age-old debate regarding toilet seats that has raged since the Stone Age, or at least since modern toilets became widespread. Seat up or seat down. Those who pee standing and those who sit have vastly different views on the matter, often leading to frustration, arguments, and even breakups. But weirdly, the video game Prey takes this long-lasting discussion into account, as your choice of avatar has an impact on whether your seat is up or down. The game allows you to play as either a male or female version of the protagonist, with your choice having a minor impact on the environment. If you pick the female option, the toilet seat in your apartment will be down, but if you pick the male one, it will be left up. This is a detail that hardly anybody will put some serious thought into, but still, it adds an amusing tidbit for those who find it. Number 8. Melting ice cubes. Metal Gear Solid 2. Seeing ice melt will hardly set anyone's brain alight in real life. I mean, sure, it's more interesting than watching paint dry, but not by a large margin. However, ice melting at a realistic speed in a video game was oddly fascinating, and MGS2 gives you just that. This PlayStation 2 classic is known for its immense attention to detail. The legendary Hideo Kojima added in plenty of environmental effects into this seminal sequel to help make it feel more alive, and one such detail included a bar, patience, and an ice bucket. During the game's first mission, you'll stumble across a fully stocked bar with an ice bucket standing stationary. Shooting this bucket will cause ice to spread across the bar, with the cubes becoming smaller and smaller the more you wait. It takes several minutes for the ice to melt completely, but you can watch the whole process if you are so inclined. Thank you, Hideo Kojima, for this needless but incredibly realistic detail that nobody noticed or asked for. Number 7. Jewish NPCs don't appear on the Sabbath. Marvel's Spider-Man. A good superhero game needs solid NPCs. You won't feel like your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man if you don't have a friendly neighborhood to save, right? Well, thankfully, Insomniac nailed this in their version of New York City, with this clever inclusion signifying just how much thought went into it. Now, within the melting pot that is New York City are many folks of different walks of life, a few of which come from Orthodox Judaism. These Jewish NPCs appear throughout the open world. However, there is a certain day where searching for them will actually prove futile. Saturdays, or the Sabbath, play an important role in the Jewish faith as a day of rest. As such, practicing members will stay home on this holy day, and this extends to this game, as you won't find any Jewish NPCs about in New York City whenever you play on a Saturday. This incredible display of authenticity was easy to miss, so much so that a dev had to reveal it to players via Twitter. It's a great yet subtle way to make New York feel alive. Number 6. You can get caught by speed cameras. Crysis 2. If you were told to put on a nanosuit and shoot your way through an urban jungle, then minding the speed limit will probably be the last thing on your mind. I mean, why on earth would you even think about such trivialities when you've got the power of an elite soldier? However, just because you're the hero doesn't mean that you're above the law, and Crysis 2 lovingly brought you back to that reality with this tiny yet pretty accurate detail. When sprinting down certain roads and highways in the second Crysis game, you might notice a quick flash and beeping sound. Far from being a flash grenade, this is actually a speed camera clocking your excessive momentum and calling you out for breaking the speed limit. Naughty, naughty. Of course, you won't end up getting a citation or going to court for breaking the rules in this broken world, but still, it's an incredible detail and a clever way to highlight the immense power of the Crynet Nanosuit 2, and gives you a little giggle at the game's surprising accuracy. Number 5. Opossums Play Dead. Red Dead Redemption 2. Rockstar's seminal Red Dead Redemption 2 could fill every spot on this list without breaking a sweat, as it has intricacies and absurd attentions to detail all across the board. And unsurprisingly, the open world's wildlife is no exception. There are hundreds upon hundreds of creatures in this game, one of which being the humble opossum. While they're not as noticeable as bears or horses, the devs still saw fit to recreate their real-life habits in the game with incredible accuracy. If you spook one of these marsupials, they won't respond by attacking or running away, but by playing possum and appearing dead. Opossums are known to do this in real life, as apparent death death is an involuntary reaction that they can have when threatened. Contrary to the popular belief, these creatures aren't putting on Oscar-worthy performances. Instead, they enter a catatonic state as a response to stress, also known as thanatosis. Either way, the fact that this game took this into account is yet another example of Red Dead Redemption 2's sheer brilliance. Number 4. Triggering hand dryers. Payday 2. Now here's a serious question. Have you ever thought about the tactical implications of setting off a hand dryer in a video game? Probably not, right? But realistically, if you're trying to sneak about in a bathroom, you would need to. And that's where Payday 2 steps in. Part of the thrill of this multiplayer heist game is stealthily casing a joint before launching your attack. However, things do not always go to plan, as there are many ways to alert the guards. During the Framing Frame mission in Payday 2, you can enter through a door that takes you into a bathroom. But if you crouch under the automatic hand dryers adjacent on the exit, you will trigger them, alerting the guards who come in to ruin your plans. Now, hand dryers are usually innocuous details in video game environments. Still, that is not the case in real life, as they can be damn loud when set off. And this incredible accuracy adds another spice to your stealth life, as potential sabotage or as a great tool to distract an enemy. Number 2. Accurate Islamic prayer. Assassin's Creed Mirage. The Assassin's Creed franchise has long been a bastion of historically accurate gaming. Sure, the sci-fi stuff is about as realistic as the Easter Bunny, but all the history stuff is top-notch. So none of you will actually be surprised to learn that Mirage has some astonishingly accurate features. Now, this game brings the Islamic Golden Age to life through the open-world rendition of Baghdad. One specific area of focus is the importance of Islamic prayer, which this game tackles masterfully. The first point of accuracy is the inclusion of Adhan, the Islamic call to prayer. You'll hear it once during a game day, as opposed to the 5 times that it occurs in real life, and the sound design fully encapsulates this daily part of Muslim life. On top of that, the NPCs have incredibly accurate praying animations, as they perform all the key movements required. They also face towards the direction of the Kaaba in Mecca, which is an essential part of the ritual. Overall, this focus on accurate cultural fixtures brings authenticity to the forefront of Assassin's Creed Mirage. And number 1, Hitler's missing testicle, the Sniper Elite series. Hitler, he only has one ball. The truth behind the urban legend that Hitler lacked a second testicle is definitely the subject of much debate. Still, there are many records, including a medical exam reported by The Guardian, pointing to its validity. Now, how does this play into video games? Well, the Sniper Elite series decided to render this historical tidbit in gruesome detail. Ouch. This shooter series depicts your kills in all their gory glory via an X-ray kill cam that was introduced in Sniper Elite V2. Shoot somebody through the heart and you'll see it rupture, knock them with a headshot and you'll watch their brain explode, tag them in the testicle and, well, you get this. If you go for an infamous testicle shot on the dreaded Hitler, you'll notice the X-ray only shows one. So there you have it. Sniper Elite made sure the historical accuracy was at the forefront of shooting this ruthless dictator in the nuts. Whoever had the weird as hell job of animating Hitler's exploding ball definitely needs a pay rise.
As a gamer, it's incredibly easy to take things for granted. AAA games generally have a baseline level of polish that allows us to forget the thousands of man-hours that go into crafting even the most rudimentary elements of a video game. And while it of course makes sense to commit major resources to the building blocks of any game, sometimes developers end up investing frankly absurd amounts of time, energy, and effort into details which might go totally unseen by the vast majority of players. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are 10 video games that put insane work into tiny details. Number 10. Sinks that have full plumbing modeled underneath, in case you shoot them. The Division 2. Destructible environments have been a major technical gaming breakthrough over the last 20 years, with games like Red Faction ushering in the ability for players to wreck a large portion of the surrounding scenery with their arsenal of weaponry. But generally speaking, the destruction is usually fairly superficial, because just how much attention are most players going to really pay to the wreckage left behind? Well, Ubisoft took things to the next level with The Division 2, whereby players could shoot ceramic sinks and peer into the photoreal plumbing that had been lovingly modeled underneath. The bafflingly meticulous detail was discovered by Redditor Tony Alexander, confirming just how much effort the developers put into making the destructible environments as tactile and authentic as possible. Considering 99.8% of players have never even noticed this, it's both impressive and maddening that an artist clearly spent a ton of time creating these absurdly realistic plumbing models. Number 9. Every raindrop is an individual asset. Drive Club. PS4 racer Drive Club may have had a rough launch, but there was little denying the game's stunning visual presentation, particularly its ludicrously realistic looking weather effects. Shortly after launch, Evolution Studios patched in a dynamic weather system, which touted one especially mind-blowing feature: that every single raindrop was effectively its own asset and individually subject to the very real laws of physics. The rain doesn't simply fall to the ground or your car in linear fashion, but moves and flows through the sky according to both wind conditions and the speed of the car. It's details like this which have allowed Drive Club to remain one of the most visually impressive racing games on the market, despite releasing 7 years ago and facing stiff competition from the Forza franchise above all else. Number 8. The solar system is accurate for 2185. Mass Effect 2. As much as Mass Effect 2 might offer up a speculative, fantastical view of the future, its 2185 setting is actually rooted in a greater sense of physical realism than you'd probably think. The game's beautiful map of the solar system is an almost note-perfect representation of how the planets will be arranged in 2185. Redditor Sergeant Lipton35 compared the game's map with a scientifically accurate simulation, and it was basically spot on. Except that is for the game's incorrect placement of Pluto, though given its famously erratic orbit makes it incredibly difficult to guess where it will be in the future with any real accuracy, it's a forgivable gaffe. Even with many Mass Effect fans considering themselves space buffs and science nerds, it's laudable for BioWare to do so much homework to back up their mesmerizing vision of the future. Number 6. The birds are modeled from real Oregonian birds. Life is Strange. Life is Strange may take place in the fictional Oregonian town of Arcadia Bay, but the locale was heavily inspired by numerous real Oregon towns, namely Tillamook Bay, Garibaldi, and Oceanside. The inspiration didn't end there though, as the team at Don't Nod also went to the extent of only including birds in the game which could be found in Oregon itself. Considering that only ornithologists would have ever called Don't Nod out, it's extremely impressive that they committed a clearly significant amount of research time to ensuring the avian wildlife was accurate to the region. And with so much of the game being a curated cinematic experience, there's perhaps less likelihood that players would stop to smell the roses and explore the environment. All that effort for such a minimal immersive return. Number 5. The sky has realistic light pollution. Grand Theft Auto 5. It of course shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that a Rockstar game is overflowing with mind-boggling, unnecessary technical details. Grand Theft Auto 5 is one of their most detail-rich titles to date, and with the game's online component continuing to receive strong support, it's little surprise that players are still discovering new details. In 2019, Redditor Vikanov noticed that San Andreas actually has a level of light pollution in major urban areas that's similar to that of the real Southern California it's based on. Basically, the further you venture away from the harshly lit urban sprawl into the rural hills, it becomes easier to observe the constellations in the night sky, just as is true in real life. Rockstar could easily have just slapped a skybox in their game and received no complaints, but they once again proved their over-the-odds commitment to the finest details. Number 4. Ants carry leaves up tree trunks. Horizon Zero Dawn. Horizon Zero Dawn is undeniably one of the most visually impressive AAA games released over the last 5 years, and it's easy to get so caught up in the gorgeously fluid combat animations and enemy designs that you'd end up glossing over the small stuff. In this case, literally. Despite the gargantuan task of releasing their geologically diverse open world, Guerrilla Games also took the time to implement an ant patrol system. Stop by some of the larger trees around the game world and you'll see armies of leafcutter ants carrying leaves up and down trees. Better still, if you open up the game's photo mode, you can get an even closer look at the insects, which are indeed individually rendered entities in their own right. For a game with such a teeming vast world, to commit resources to such a minor piece of its ecosystem is absolutely flabbergasting, honestly. Number 3. On the highest difficulty, the Korean soldiers speak Korean. Crisis. There's no denying that Crisis was an absolute technical landmark when it launched in 2007, touting groundbreaking graphical fidelity which left only the hardiest rigs capable of playing it at maxed out settings. But one of its most impressive features is one that was effectively gated off to most players. If you decided to play the game on its hardest difficulty level, Delta, you not only faced intense resistance from enemies, but the North Korean soldiers you encountered would actually speak Korean to one another. In all other difficulties, the soldiers would simply shout broken English at the player, but in Delta, they communicated communicate in Korean, making it more difficult for the player to figure out their attack strategy from what they're saying. Given the obvious effort involved in scripting, translating, and voicing this extensive NPC chatter, it's crazy that the vast majority of players never even had the chance to experience it, given they may have avoided the Delta difficulty altogether. Number 2. Horses can choose from 3,000 movement animations. Red Dead Redemption 2. There's a fair argument to be made that Red Dead Redemption 2 is the most obsessively detail-rich video game ever made, and that's perhaps felt no better than through the lengths the developer took to ensure they delivered ultra-realistic horse companions. In a recent GDC talk, Rockstar North's lead AI game programmer detailed the shocking depths to the game's horse programming. The team started by filming real footage of horses in Scotland to use as a reference, after which they decided to create 3,000 individual movement animations, which the game could string together on the fly to reflect the horse's gait, speed, mood, and even the terrain it's traveling across. This allowed the game's horses to seem reactive in the way that a real horse is, including a self-preservation mechanic whereby the horse wouldn't willingly hurl itself into harm's way at your command. On top of this, each of the 19 breeds of horse in the game has their own temperament and personality type, and even their own poop cycle. Yep, it's a dizzying amount of work, and while the horses are certainly not a minor part of Red Dead Redemption 2 in and of themselves, the effort put into making them seem like living things is arguably incommensurate to its actual importance in the grand scheme of things. The excellence of the end result, though, speaks for itself. Number 1. Mario's hair and mustache are rendered from individual hairs. Super Mario Odyssey. Super Mario Odyssey was the first mainline Mario platformer released for the Nintendo Switch, and an unsurprisingly colossal critical and commercial hit upon release. It was clear once again that Nintendo had poured a ton of heart into this love letter to all things Mario, while also benefiting from the modest technical boost of the Switch's hardware. As a result, fans were treated to a more detailed Mario than ever before, including the divisive yet fascinating decision to render Mario's mustache and hair from individual hairs for the first time. While Mario's distinctive stash and hair were effectively textured blocks in the previous games, in Odyssey they were actually created from separate intermingled strands of hair. Though the game's photo mode certainly allowed fans to savor the extra fidelity of the new Mario model, this is still a tireless detail which will fly clear over the heads of most players, especially younger ones.
In gaming, environmental storytelling can be everything. The act of something like The Last of Us giving you an entire house filled with photos of a long-deceased family, slowly filling in a background narrative on just what happened to these people before you arrived. Basically, we're talking about a level of detail that rewards exploration and paying attention, something only the best video games can pull off. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and these are 9 video game plot details everyone missed. Number 9. You can see Doc Ock slowly losing it over time. Spider-Man 2018. Providing you didn't cotton onto this by manually checking out Dr. Octavius' notes yourself across the game, one of the best realizations in 2018 Spider-Man comes from Doc Ock materializing in front of your eyes without you really knowing. Brilliantly, Insomniac knew going in that we'd be expecting the obvious from Otto, and the game opens on his robotic arms malfunctioning, only for him to return to normal straight after. However, the whiteboard behind Octavius does change across the game, both in the background of main story cutscenes and if you check back into your office manually by visiting away from the open world. Keep an eye on this board and you can literally chart Otto's descent into madness, the amount of forward planning he was doing for the game's big jailbreak sequence, and how he was always Doc Ock underneath this friendly facade. Peter and you just hadn't realized yet. Number 8. BioShock's big twist gets foreshadowed at the beginning. As one of the most legendary and impactful, nay medium-changing plot twists and story upenders of all time, BioShock's Would You Kindly Reveal is as immaculate gets. However, as almost an additional layer of brain melt if you go back through Ken Levine and Irrational Games' masterwork is early dialogue from character Sullivan if you find the right audio diary. Here, Sullivan details the respawn-enabling bathyspheres, the tanks you've been using to come back to life after death. Though a very video gamey thing to include, here he practically spells out part of BioShock's biggest twist, noting that the only people who can use these machines have to be in the genetic ballpark of Rapture creator Andrew Ryan. Obviously, all that fourth wall acknowledging stuff is what really broke the industry for the better, but listening to Sullivan's notes, it's pretty obvious that Jack and Ryan are connected from the beginning. Number 7. Inside's hidden control room. Literally just go play Inside. Playdead's follow-up to Limbo is an immaculate physics-based puzzle platformer with a supremely dark edge, a brilliantly interpretational ending, and a brutal power fantasy final sequence. Anyway, to bring it back to what many people missed, there is a secret ending, found by locating all 14 depth-charge-looking secret orbs, then visiting an underground bunker back at the start of the game, rather than continuing on that main path. Here, and it only contributes to the many reads of this game, you'll be able to unlock a chamber by playing a sequence of notes first heard in the factory area's background, enabling you to pull the plug on your own consciousness and plunge the game into pitch black. Inside's many interpretations include one on an oppressed working class, the drudgery of an unfulfilling manual labor job, and the potentially bloody rebellion that comes from speaking truth to power. This ending suggests that all it takes is one individual to not be in the right place at the right time for nothing to happen at all. At least that's my take. Number 6. Plague Knight learns to dance. Shovel Knight. What eventually turned into the Shovel Knight treasure trove, the collection of the original game's campaign, 3 additional campaigns, and a Smash Bros. Style spin-off all in the same package, remains one hell of a coding feat from developers Yacht Club. It's a series filled with charm, genuinely funny writing, and supremely tight, rewarding platforming. However, some of the best scenes come from the respective characters' closing moments, and for Plague Knight, that involves him finally plucking up the courage to take the alchemist Mona's hand and dance the night away as the final credits roll. However, you can exponentially add to this moment by visiting the Troupple King earlier in the story, where the forest god will teach Plague Knight that by holding down on the D-pad, he can practice what will turn into this final waltz. Beautifully, at one point in the story, you'll also catch Mona practicing her half too, but neither of the pair have their respective dancing partners until the story ends. Number 5. Batman Arkham City's big twist is hiding in plain sight. Rocksteady might have dropped off the radar while becoming completely embroiled in the creation of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, but their Arkham trilogy is one of the true greats. With Arkham Asylum secretly hiding in-game blueprints for what would become Arkham City, that game's Joker twist is also flagged at multiple points across the game if you're paying attention. See, as City's big reveal is that there are 2 Jokers, one real and one played by Clayface. If you flick your detective vision on whenever the more youthful version of Joker is on screen or fighting you, you'll notice he doesn't have a skeleton. It's a super subtle visual clue that even if you did notice, you'll likely chalk up to, well, that's just how Joker looks in this game. Instead, it's spelling out that this Joker isn't real, and this Clayface version of the character has been helping toy with Bruce since the start. Number 4. Call of Duty Black Ops Reznov was always on your mind. Speaking of toying with you from the start, Black Ops represented the perfect nexus of action and storytelling in Call of Duty history. To this day, the original Blops is held up as the most fun time we had with a given story, and it's something largely carried over into the multifaceted campaign of Black Ops 2. With the whole game centering on one Alex Mason being interrogated over some mysterious numbers he can't quite remember the meaning of, developers Treyarch left a doozy of a clue staring you in the face regardless. Revealing the game's big twist that your pal Viktor Reznov isn't even real, take the first letter of each individual word that follows the designate text in your mission briefing, and it spells out XREZNOVXXISDEDX, i.e. Reznov is dead. There's next to no way anybody got this first time through, but it's a supremely cool detail for repeat playthroughs. Number 3. Hotline Miami 2's Miami Mutilator. As a gorgeously gratuitous gore-fest backed by the finest synthwave music on the planet back in 2014, Hotline Miami's sequel dove headfirst into the ramifications of a lone vigilante murdering their way across the city from the first game. There's a team of young fanatics replicating the killings, a movie director adapting what happened to their own gain, more individuals being hired by the mysterious 50 Blessings company in the background, and Manny Pardo, a detective on the case of the whole thing. Only Pardo is actually the Miami Mutilator, a career serial killer annoyed with the fact he's losing column headlines. Though this gets spelt out when he confronts his own psyche later on, or when the police finally confront him, during an earlier level if you look in the back of his car, you'll find the soon-to-be victim of a brutal killing still tied up squirming in the trunk. Number 2. Vamp Lives, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. Looking back through the largely corporately approved AAA space of the modern day, it is a minor miracle that we got the Metal Gear Solid series for as long as we did. As incredible East meets West combinations of anime and Western action tropes, it was the roster of bosses that occasionally shone brightest. One of which then is Vamp, a Romanian child who becomes a blood-sucking terrorist while learning to dodge bullets in the style of a flamenco dancer. Yep, it was that damn original. Anyway, Vamp mysteriously comes back to life after being shot in the head in MGS2, but when Raiden's only method of defeat is to shoot him in the head again with a more powerful rifle, another reappearance always hung over the rest of the story. Well, hold R1 during during Sons of Liberty's final scene when Raiden is choosing his new name, and Vamp can be seen alive and well standing in the background. Number 1. Doomguy has a wife and child. Yes, in the words of wrestling's Jim Ross, that man's got a family. Though Doom Eternal was slightly divisive amongst the Doom fandom for being perhaps a little bit too wacky and video gamey with its power-ups, level design, and portrayal of Doomguy himself, it also meant the character got more fleshed out than ever. I'm talking Doomguy's bedroom coming with flying V-style heavy metal guitars, an assortment of PC games he enjoys in between the slaughter, and most fascinatingly of all, the fact he did once have a family. Located on the floor in the Fortress of Doom, this goes alongside the barely ever talked about history of one Flynn Taggart, who would become Doomguy, a non-practicing Catholic who maintains a healthy belief in God, according to the Doom novels. Brilliantly, this fact was confirmed by Doom Eternal creative director Hugo Martin on a post-launch livestream, showing there's a whole history to the character from the last few decades that id are more than aware of.
In the past, we here at What Culture have covered a lot of video games with details that, for lack of better words, are downright pointless. They say that the devil is in the detail, and when considering the dark, depressing, and downright gross content that we're about to cover today, you have to imagine Satan himself is rubbing his little paws together at the thought of what's to come. So let's not keep the big red waiting. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 video game details that went too far. Number 8. Horse testicles react to weather. Red Dead Redemption 2. Now, you knew this was going to be on this list, so let's just get these big swollen meat balloons out of the way early doors. Yes, for some reason or another, the devs working on Red Dead Redemption 2 thought that it would be pertinent to include horse testicles that grow and shrink depending on the weather. Now, I know that the player spends a lot of time on horseback throughout the experience, but I doubt that any, bar a select few, were spending those journeys gazing at their steeds' bollocks. And to be honest, unless you're a vet or an actual ranch owner, then I really don't want to hear for your reasons why you were staring either. What was quite comical about this whole affair, however, was that some real-world horse owners pointed out that this detail was actually incorrect, seeing as the real-world equestrian equivalent doesn't bounce as much, meaning that Rockstar was perhaps a little too enamoured with those meat marbles. Number 6. Pupils that dilate. The Last of Us Part 2. Now, here's a detail that, while being utterly impressive from a technical standpoint, is one that arguably wasn't just pointless, but was something that directly contributed to a rather nasty aspect of the gaming industry at large. I'm speaking, of course, about crunch culture. No, that's not another YouTube channel that we're thinking of starting, but actually the often enforced work ethic that sees developers and designers of video games work way past contracted hours under the passive-aggressive threat of repercussions should they want to do things like, I don't know, have a life outside of work. The Last of Us 2 and Naughty Dog as a whole were hit with reams of allegations about the excessive and unfair working conditions of its employees. However, Neil Druckmann responded to the situation by stating that the Last of Us team enjoyed crunch culture as they were perfectionists. Now, while it's all well and good to give your heart and soul to a project if you truly believe in it, considering the much less enthused workforces of other companies that are forced to go through crunch culture, it seems like a little too far to almost begin championing it. The dilation of the eyes is truly impressive, but one has to ask the question, is crunch culture as a whole worth detail like this? Number 5. The 10-hour tutorial. Final Fantasy XIII. Sometimes it's not the individual detail that goes too far, but the sheer amount of them that really yanks at your nostril hair, and such a plucker was how Final Fantasy XIII decided to dole out its player tutorials. Now, as it stands, Final Fantasy XIII and its weird offshoots are considered to be the Sonic 06 moment for Square Enix, where they doubled down on characters that few enjoyed, told a story that even less understood or cared for, and took a hand-holding approach to its gameplay that left bruises thanks to its vice-like grip. It's a game that defenders will say gets good after about 10 hours, which is a statement that carries as much water as a bloody sieve, but does inform you that Final Fantasy XIII has some huge gameplay flow issues. The biggest assassin of your fun comes in the form of a protracted 10-hour tutorial that will feed you meager information pieces about the battle system and the world around you. It's these details that should have been present from the start, as seeing as the level design for these opening hours is basically corridor paradise, would have allowed the player some flexibility on how these battles play out or how to build a party. We wanted the details, in this case, up front, damn it. Number 3. You never actually get the crown. Fall Guys. So as we all know, Fall Guys is a game for absolute sadists that is dressed up in a manner that makes it look like a 90s Saturday morning cartoon. It's a game that will make you coo with awe before then crying out, "Oh, fuck this bullshit," as it swings wildly between being so cute that butter wouldn't melt to roasting your very soul as your friends betray you at the final hurdle. Compounding all of this frustration, however, is a small detail that admittedly breaks my heart every single time I see it, and that's that even when winning the elusive crown by persevering through drunken bean hell, your little fella over here never ever gets to have the crown, either losing it or failing to grasp it before it floats away again. It's a scenario that seems like the cruelest moment in the cruelest of games, a shattering of glass that reveals that you're locked inside a gameplay loop of chasing a crown that you'll never actually win. Woof. Number 2. Some of the enemies are forced conscripts. Call of Duty World at War. Now, the Call of Duty games are well known for their rather bombastic approach to warfare, often resembling a Michael Bay venture with the excess of explosions and patriotism that oozes out of every orifice. However, there are key moments when COD decides to get shockingly real, and for some, it's a little too much like the real thing for comfort. Take, for example, the shocking revelation that in Call of Duty World at War's 6th mission, Burn 'em All, you're not just fighting against the Imperial Japanese Army, but also conscripts that were forced to serve the Japanese Army after being captured. This rather grim detail was found by fans who analysed the speech of some of the soldiers that you're roasting alive, as it was revealed that not all of them were speaking Japanese. Some, it turns out, were speaking Indonesian, and thus leading many to believe that these soldiers are forced conscripts who really don't want to be fighting either way. Now, we've witnessed nuclear devastation and multiple player deaths in the first person in these games, but somehow this is the moment that feels like things were most real and most painfully traumatic. And number 1, burning a man alive to open a door, God of War. When you're a seething mass of muscles and might as well have I love revenge tattooed on your head, you'd likely expect a lot of people to out and out just try everything in their power to never have your shadow darken their doorstep. This is likely why very few people have Kratos on their Christmas cards list, as this God of War will truly stop at nothing to get vengeance, meaning that he's murdered more than his fair share of innocents along the way. Take, for example, the absolutely shocking scenario within the Temple of Pandora, where Kratos finds that the way is blocked. Now, the devs at this point could have easily just had the God of War find a key or bust down the door using his brute strength, but for some reason they decided that this particular door could only be opened with a human sacrifice. So Kratos drops back from the gate and lowers down a soldier who's trapped in a cage, who at first is relieved that he's being saved from a rather terrible fate. Except the fate that's actually in store for him is much worse, something the soldier realizes as he's dragged at an agonizingly slow pace up to the entrance. He pleads with Kratos, asking what he's doing, that they could just return to Athens together, but appears he's just yelling into the void as Kratos then burns the man alive in order to proceed. It's a detail that's dragged out, feels unnecessarily cruel, and doesn't even further our relationship with Kratos as a character, making the whole affair feel like excess for excess's sake.
There is so much to love in the world of video games, and attention to detail is right up there with our favorites. Maybe it's because it's one of those things that shows the developers are putting as much love into their games as we're getting out of them. We can see this through unique and complex mechanics, engrossing narratives, and fan-favorite returning plot points and characters that are included just to make you happy. But it doesn't have to be a big inclusion to get us saying, oh damn, how cool. In fact, most of all the lovely little details on this list are so small that you'd be forgiven, even expected, to miss them entirely. But with a little help from those of you who pay particular attention to every little addition in your favorite games, we've pulled together a bunch of really clever inclusions that truly enhance the game worlds in these already fantastic games once you notice them. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are 10 awesome details you missed in iconic video games. Number 10. If Zombies Could Read, Dead Space Remake. Now, when I say awesome details you missed, I really mean there's an incredibly high chance you're gonna miss these. In this particular case, you'd miss it even if you saw it, unless you happen to speak Norwegian. If you do speak Norwegian and lovingly checked out the environments in the Dead Space remake, I'm sorry, but you're just gonna have to sit back and wait for the next entry for me to tell you something you haven't already heard before. You'll have to excuse my French, Norwegian on this one. Don't worry, I'll only read you the translation, but there is a message scrawled on a wall in-game that reads, "And if you effing zombies have learned to read, go to hell too," which is just fantastic. Fans have mused over why the graffiti is in Norwegian, with explanations ranging from the culturally diverse crew of the USG Ishimura to the similarities between the necromorphs and the mutations in 1982 horror film The Thing, which kicks off at a Norwegian base. Whatever the case, it's a really cute Easter egg. Cute as in it's a cute thing to find, not cute as in it's absolutely the scrawlings of a soon-to-be necromorph charm person. Number 9. The Seikulo's Epitaph. Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Whether you love the gigantic open worlds that the Assassin's Creed franchise has taken to of late, or prefer the tighter presentation the series used to have before it went full RPG, it's hard to deny that Odyssey in particular is a phenomenal feat of world building. Down to the smallest of features, Odyssey is determined to recreate ancient Greece with a deft hand, and this particular little detail is a great example of that. In several locations, including the seaport town of Payne, you can stumble upon people singing a particular melody. This wouldn't be much to write home about, except the particular song you can encounter these people singing is the Seikilos Epitaph, the longest surviving musical piece in history. If you, like me, are a gigantic nerd, this is extremely cool. The piece is also included in a couple of the later Civilization games, funnily enough, and it's a fantastic detail for games that strive to recreate such a specific point in history. The composition even has lyrics, which translate to, "While you live, shine, have no grief at all. Life exists only for a short while, and time demands his due." Kind of a bummer, but still cool. Technically, the piece was composed a little while after Odyssey takes place, but it's still a nice touch and an especially important historic find, which makes sense for the franchise. Number 8. One man's trash is another man's treasure. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. There isn't a long list of video game locations where prosperity flourishes and nobody has to scrap to make ends meet, and if there was such a list, Skyrim would not make the cut. It's a tough life out there, adventurer or no, so when the Dragonborn stumbles into town and drops some expensive shit on the floor, whether they're trying to rearrange their inventory or they just don't want that particular thing anymore, people are gonna take notice. There's actually a few different things that can go down if you drop something, especially something of value. If there are enough people around who think it's worth something, they'll get into a scrap fighting over who's gonna pick it up. Similarly, if you're attacked and your would-be assassin has an expensive item on their body once you're done with them, you can see people trying to loot it, assuming you didn't get to them first. This is pretty easy to miss, since you're probably not going to be leaving your nice gear on the ground all that much, but it's a very cool world-building touch once you notice it. There are even dialogue lines specifically written and recorded to reference the item that might have been dropped or who saw you drop it. So I hope whatever developer put all the effort into programming this one is feeling pretty gratified right about now. Number 7. Realistically simulated headlights. Grand Theft Auto 5. If you were thinking that entries like a super old song and a single line of zombie cussing out graffiti are fairly minute details, I hope you enjoyed learning about them anyway, because this entry is about headlight positioning. Not just any headlight positioning though, headlight positioning in a game that you're pretty much just going to be speeding through the streets anyway, and when you are going through the streets, you're very rarely going to be on the right side of the road to notice it. If you are the specific type of gamer who likes to slow things down a bit, maybe stop at a red light or two and drive on the right side of the road in Grand Theft Auto, you would have noticed your headlights have a particular slant. This is the same slant headlights are manufactured with in real life. So when you're driving on the right side of the road, which I hope you are in real life, you don't blind oncoming cars. So a couple of relevant things here. The first being that Rockstar continues to raise the bar when it comes to lovingly replicating tiny details in their games. And the second is that if you didn't know this and thought one of your headlights might have been going out because it's slightly dimmer, it's probably all good. What culture, of course, doesn't accept any liability if in fact one of your headlights is going out and you need to go get that checked. That's on you. Number 6. Roach Race Champion. Cyberpunk 2077. Cyberpunk 2077 is another game that's positively littered with Easter eggs, references, and various homages. In fact, the only thing that outnumbers all the lovely little details is the still rampant bugs, but Night City is a delight to explore and get lost in all the same. It certainly didn't get off to a great start, but the futuristic playground is well and truly worth your time, now that the game-breaking bugs are down to an absolute minimum. There's loads to love in here and plenty of that classic Setup Projekt Red magic. While we're spoiled for choice when it comes to selecting just one awesome detail from this one, we've gone with the high scoreboard in the Roach Run minigame. This minigame can be played at various arcade machines littered throughout Night City, and of course it references Geralt's faithful steed, Roach. While that's a cute touch, it's the entry at the top of the high score leaderboard we're interested in for this particular entry. You might remember Ciri telling Geralt in The Witcher 3 that she visited a world where people had metal in their heads, waged war from a distance using things similar to megascopes, and everyone had their own flying ship. Geralt dismisses her story, but a peek at the Roach Run leaderboard proves not only was she there, she's apparently really great at this arcade game. The very top entry is Z1R343L, or Zariel in Leetspeak. the elder speech origin of series name. Number 5. Collateral Damage, Mass Effect 3 Citadel DLC. Much like many games on this list, the Mass Effect trilogy has no shortage of Easter eggs or references, and the Citadel DLC is home to a lot of them. While there are loads of sweet moments between your companions and callbacks from old friends that you'll no doubt have come across as you played this one, I'm betting far less of you focused fire on the Sky car in the Scythian Motors car lot. If you did decide to do that by electing to destroy the beautiful new car instead of the dudes who are literally shooting at you, you'll elicit an enormously pained cry from the Vola salesman watching the destruction unfold. Take out enough of them totally needlessly and he'll say, "My beautiful, beautiful cars." It's very silly and very unlikely for you to come across, but if you did happen to notice this one, it's another top tier bit of comedy from one of the best DLCs in video games. Number 4. Acrophobia, A Way Out. If you remember anything from A Way Out, it's probably that ending, which you'll remember as the last moment you were friends with whoever you decided to play A Way Out with. But if you can cast your mind to earlier on in Hazelight's co-op adventure, there's a few great little tidbits that can be found by observant players. Take for instance the section where Leo and Vincent need to cross a precarious bridge, trying to evade a helicopter that's after them. Leo makes a note of the fact that he's really not a fan of heights, and indeed, if you're paying attention to the split-screen experience, there's a subtle yet hugely effective cinematic change to reflect this. There's a dolly zoom effect that trundles the camera angle in a sickening fashion only on Leo's side of the screen, to reflect his vertigo and nausea. It's a minor change in a section of the game that lasts no more than 20 seconds, but it is a lovely addition for those of you who pick up on that kind of thing. Number 3. Lightsabers and water don't mix. Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast. If you know anything about lightsabers, apart from how fun it is to make their sound effects with your mouth, then it's probably the fact that they're hot laser weapons, so putting them in water wouldn't be the obvious choice. Then again, with video games being what they are, you might find yourself wanting to combine the two anyway, or you might just happen upon a spot of bad weather. Not to worry, as Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast had an answer for both of these scenarios. It's quite subtle, so you'd be forgiven for not noticing, but if you were caught in the rain in Raven Software's 2002 sci-fi shooter, you can see raindrops sizzling off your drawn saber and evaporating into smoke as they heat up. Want to dip that lightsaber right into a body of water? Well, of course you do, and don't worry, they thought about that one too. Swiping at the water with your weapon out will cause the water to boil temporarily. If that little feature sounds familiar, it's because this very same thing happens when you cast fire spells into water in Skyrim. You gotta love attentive dev teams. Number 2. Leliana designed Morrigan's dress, Dragon Age Origins. To be across this one, you'd have to be a Dragon Age fan who played the games from Origins through to Inquisition, and you'd have to have picked up on a particular randomly occurring side conversation between Leliana and Morrigan. Not to mention, you'd need to notice a relatively subtle detail that was mentioned in a game from 2009 and not implemented until another title in the series that arrived in 2014. If that describes you, well, I don't know what to say. You're just better than everybody else. But for me and everybody else who's watching right now, let me run you through it. A particular idle companion dialogue can occur while you're moseying around in Dragon Age Origins, wherein Leliana has a go at Morrigan for not dressing nicer. In the exchange, she says the following: "Maybe we could go get you a nice dress one day. Silk, no, maybe velvet. Velvet is heavier, better to guard against the cold in Ferelden. Dark red velvet, yes, with gold embroidery. It should be cut low in the front, of course, we don't want to hide your features. You don't think so? And if it's cut low in the front, we must put your hair up to show off that lovely neck." Leliana being a bit of a creep there aside, you might find that image to be somewhat familiar, and it should sound familiar. That's because it is very similar to the look and dress that Morrigan wears 2 games later in Dragon Age Inquisition. Right down to the neckline, the embroidery, and the hairstyle. Even though Morrigan shuts Leliana down at the time, she seems to have taken the fashion advice on board. Number 1. A sympathetic criminal. Judgment. Finally, we've got a relatively small detail from the fantastic Yakuza spin-off Judgment. These games are known for their practically unparalleled ability to combine high-stakes crime drama with earnest relationship building, and loads of comedic moments. This one would fall into that third category. While engaging in combat, there's a chance that a robber might try to steal from you. Of course, just because they try to steal from you doesn't necessarily mean you have anything to steal. If protagonist Yagami is especially down on his luck that day and has literally nothing for a bad guy to steal, the on-screen prompt says "stolen" with a question mark, adding, "You don't have any money." In the English translation, he says, "Wow, I'm that broke." It's more than a little embarrassing for Yagami, but very entertaining for us.
No matter the medium, foreshadowing is always a satisfying storytelling device. It's not easy to get right, of course, and messing it up can ruin a potential twist or reveal at the end of a narrative, but sometimes writers are amazing at dropping subtle hints to future events or beats. This often gets to the point where you don't even notice them the first time around, but upon a revisit, they seem so obvious that you feel a little silly for missing them. We've covered some great examples of this before when it comes to major endgame plot twists, but sometimes games are even subtler than that, and can reveal a huge detail about a character long before it's ever actually addressed in the story. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 9 tiny video game details that give away character secrets. And of course, massive spoilers ahead. Number 9. Arthur's sickness, Red Dead Redemption 2. There are some impeccable little details hidden in Red Dead Redemption 2 that foreshadow character twists and entire relationships before they're explicitly brought into the narrative. From Micah worming his way into Dutch's ear to Karen's downfall following the death of lover Sean. It's Arthur having TB that becomes obvious on a second run though. When playing it originally, I actually thought this late game twist kinda came out of nowhere. But when you know it's coming, it's almost too obvious what Rockstar was setting up. There are a bunch of moments where Arthur has a coughing fit early on, for instance, which don't seem to be related until you remember that characters only ever cough in fiction when they're desperately unwell. At one point, he even writes in his journal that he's been feeling sick, but that it's, quote, probably nothing. Most of the telltale signs come in Guarma though, just prior to Arthur actually being diagnosed. Here, the character is coughing, fatigued, and even has the bloodshot eyes that define his appearance in Chapter 6. Yet most players chalk it up to the trauma of the shipwreck, not any long-term disease. Number 8, you're actually a cat. Ghost Trick. Ghost Trick Phantom Detective, which might be just the best name a video game has ever had, is a quirky adventure title released on the Nintendo DS, which sees the player take control of a spectre named Sissel and tasked with figuring out who they're controlling, why they're a ghost, and what their purpose is. It's mad stuff, and that kind of mysterious setup inherently informs the player that twists are to be expected. Even with those expectations in mind though, nobody could guess that Sissel was actually a cat who was shot before becoming a ghost. On a second playthrough, however, it's so obvious that Sissel isn't human, to the point where it's a bit kind of embarrassing. The fact that you meet other spirits who have taken different forms than their alive selves, who are also the only other spirits with amnesia by the way, have a tendency to play fight with mice, can see in the dark, hates getting wet, and all around exhibits cat-like behavior, everything clues you in without you actually knowing it. Seriously, there are so many hints in the game that there are entire pages dedicated to the foreshadowing, and it's totally amazing. Number 7, the names of Atlas's fake dead family, BioShock. When it comes to killer twists and expert foreshadowing, few games are more popular than BioShock. Everyone knows about the would you kindly reveal and the friendly Atlas turning out to be real villain Frank Fontaine, but the fact that you're being strung along and manipulated is telegraphed even further over the early hours of the story. One memorable moment sees the player attempting to help Atlas rescue his family, made up of wife Moira and son Patrick, who are escaping in a submarine. The sub explodes, supposedly on account of Andrew Ryan, and the murder gives players all the reason they need to want him dead. Of course, there never was a family, and the whole event was further manipulation to not get you to question whether you were being manipulated at all. Yeah, BioShock is kinda confusing. Patrick and Moira are taken from the name of a place seen on posters around Rapture, which Atlas borrows for his own fake story. They're quite prominent as well, but the game counts on you not questioning your supposed ally and chalking the similarity up to coincidence. Number 6. Pretty much everyone's true identity, God of War. The first couple hours of God of War are absolutely stacked with tiny details that only make complete sense later, but you don't pay them any mind because, like Kratos, you're a stranger to this world and assume that everything is as straightforward and obvious as it seems. Faye's real identity is something which is teased early on, especially when Baldur first comes knocking. He's expecting to find a giant, and instead he bumps into Kratos, who he thinks is the giant he's looking for, which explains why he says things like, "I thought you'd be bigger." Baldur himself, specifically his weakness, is also teased early on, when Kratos and Atreus find Freyr holding mistletoe arrows. The witch freaks out and tells them they're dangerous and then destroys them in a fire. We only find out later that's because they're the only things that can break Baldur's immortality curse. There are a bunch more in God of War, which makes a second playthrough so worth it. Number 5. Peter Englert's true name, Death Stranding. There are a bunch of details, like in God of War, that are thrown at the player early on in Death Stranding, which only make full sense many hours down the line, though they are clearly signposted beforehand. However, the one which isn't explicitly revealed unless you seek it out is Villain Higgs's location within the open world. At a couple of points you'll receive an email from Peter Englert, who repeatedly asks you to haul a delicate pizza over to his house in the arse end of nowhere. These are some of the most difficult challenges in the entire game, and each time you arrive, he's never there to meet you in the flesh, always having some kind of excuse to not answer the buzzer or join the chiral network. After completing the final challenge, an email reveals though that this has actually been Higgs messing with you the whole time, and the place you've been delivering to was his hideout. It's a surprise, especially considering that most people just assumed that the obfuscated identity was simply hiding another celebrity cameo, but the pseudonym Higgs uses reveals his identity straight away. It's an amalgamation of Peter Higgs and Francois Englert, the two scientists responsible for the Higgs particle theory. Number 4. Ava's gun reveals her allegiance, Metal Gear Solid 3. After playing through Metal Gear Solid 3, you'll probably never feel comfortable trusting a person again. Everyone in this game is at least a triple agent for some organization, and by the end, pretty much everyone has betrayed Snake and proven to not be who they say they are. This includes Ava, a supposed spy who's infiltrating the terrorist organization Snake is hunting down. In the end, it turns out she was working for the Chinese government the whole time and leaves her American lover high and dry. The game doesn't exactly shy away from providing you with hints about her true colors though, but like Snake, you probably implicitly trusted this attractive super spy. The biggest giveaway is her weapon. Her Mauser is entirely unique to her and is actually a Chinese Mauser Type 17, a clear nod to her real allegiance. Considering how much of a gun nut Snake is in this, he definitely should have realized, but I guess his mind was on something else. Number 3. The lightsaber's true origin, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order slowly peels back the curtain on who main character Cal Kestis is and how he relates to the Jedi Order. But one of his secrets was hiding in plain sight in pretty much every trailer leading up to the game's release. For the most part, the devs did a pretty good job of hiding the fact that Cal doesn't just wield a regular old lightsaber, but actually has a double-edged one, despite giving players all the info they needed to realize that detail beforehand. The reason why he's seen only using one half of the weapon in the trailers and in the early game is because the lightsaber itself is actually damaged and the hilt has been destroyed. That's due to it being his master's weapon though, passed down when he was slain during Order 66. The thing is, going back, that fact was always front and center. I actually always wondered why Cal's hilt looks strangely large compared to the actual blade, and the reason is that it's not actually a hilt at all. Number 2, Saren and the Elusive Man have the same eyes, Mass Effect. The Mass Effect franchise isn't lacking in great villains, and the very best of the bunch keep you guessing as to their motivations right to the very end. At the time, ME1 Saren was a revelation, an alien bad guy whose motives you could understand, but so clearly corrupted by Reaper indoctrination that the only humane thing to do was put him out of his misery. The second game introduced the Elusive Man, the shady leader of Cerberus, who appears to be on your side at first. After all, he's one of the only people who believes the Reapers are a threat, and shifts heaven and earth to literally bring the player character back from the dead. He becomes the primary human antagonist of the third game, where it's revealed he has also been fully indoctrinated by the Reapers and has started to fuse himself with the alien tech. However, signs of indoctrination were present from his very first scene, with him having the same glowing eyes that Saren also had. This is further explained in a spin-off book, which depicted the Elusive Man's first run-in with Reaper tech years prior to the games, which caused the change in his irises and started the slow indoctrination process that was accelerated in the third release. Number 1, why 2B isn't friendly with 9S, Nier Automata. Nier Automata has so many twists wrapped within twists that you have to play through the game literally 3 times to understand everything that's going on. The aliens you thought you were fighting have been dead the whole time. The humans you thought you were defending have also been dead the whole time. And the characters you're actually playing as are actually kinda evil and kinda brainwashed. The most surprising thing though is that the first android you play as, 2B, is an execution droid designed to kill partner 9S when they reach a certain point on their journey. Their real purpose actually explains so much in hindsight though, especially how adverse 2B is to getting to know her counterpart. She always acts cold to 9S's inquisitiveness and in general is kind of a dick to him despite his constant good nature and offers of friendship. At the end you realize this is all intentional, as one day she's going to have to kill him and getting personal will only complicate matters.
As video games continue to become more ambitious in scope with the power of technology available making any vision a reality, titles have continuously pushed themselves to become more realistic. Filling their worlds with numerous tiny details for players to marvel at, we've got dripping with opulence productions like everything Naughty Dog and Rockstar have put out. Well, almost everything. However, despite graphical fidelity or any amount of player interaction being available, there are plenty of tiny details games just haven't got quite right. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com and these are 8 tiny details video games always get wrong. Number 8. Shooting barrels of oil or a car's gas tank would not explode. Yep, it's gonna be a list about this kind of stuff. Remember the red barrels craze of the 2000s? Every other shooter had random red barrels next to groups of goons for you to blow up. Grand Theft Auto, Bulletstorm, Resident Evil 6, it went further back to the likes of Doom and GoldenEye, but I digress. Exploding barrels were and sometimes still are a thing, but shooting oil or gasoline would never result in an explosion. A flammable, streaky mess, sure, but not anything close to a damage-dealing airburst that would send NPCs flying. Unless you make a point of using incendiary rounds on a minigun as the Mythbusters did to dispel this whole thing, it just ain't happening. The idea seems to come from Hollywood action flicks and it certainly belongs in action video games, just don't think about it too much. Number 7. Quivers weren't worn on backs. We all know what an archer is supposed to look like. Bow in hand with a quiver of arrows loaded on their back. It's how these people have been depicted in media for decades, with the likes of Robin Hood being the prime example on the big screen. Likewise, whenever you equip a game character with some arrows of their own, they'll probably have the quiver placed on their back. Much like many other myths spread by the factually inaccurate Hollywood though, quivers were commonly worn on belts at the hip of archers rather than on the back as Robin Hood or Skyrim would have you believe. While back quivers are commonly used in modern archery and were used in some cultures across history, like North America or Africa being examples, it was far more typical for archers to use belt quivers, especially in medieval Europe, as it was a far more practical place to store them in combat situations. Even Kingdom Come Deliverance, which prided itself on being historically accurate to its 15th century Bohemia setting, makes the same mistake of placing the quiver on the character's back. Number 6. Silencers aren't silent. If stealth games like Metal Gear Solid, Splinter Cell or Hitman have taught us anything, it's that attaching a silencer to a gun means nobody will hear it firing, even if you're wiping out someone stood right next to someone else. As fun and satisfying as it is to take out groups of enemies undetected, the reality of silencers or suppressors isn't how they're represented in games. For starters, releasing the air of the gunshot more slowly means that silencers do reduce the sound of a gunshot's thunderous bang, but nowhere near the level of that familiar sound that we've heard so many times. It will still sound like gunfire, and people will still be able to hear it, likely a few rooms over. Likewise, adding a suppressor to a weapon doesn't have any negative impact on the weapon's range or damage output, Call of Duty. Instead, this decision is more rooted in how multiplayer games balance gunplay than anything realistic. Regardless of real-world inaccuracies, silenced weapons in stealth games are a lot of fun, and I'll take this moment to say that you should all go give Splinter Cell Blacklist another chance. Number 5. Seatbelts do and don't matter. Okay, I'm blaming Saints Row and GTA 4 for this because since playing those games, literally any time I'm hurtling down a highway in any game at speed, I'm waiting for something to hit me and send my driver hurtling out the windshield and across the map instead. The Flatout series made this an awesome game mechanic. Wreckfest has your driver fly off something like a lawnmower if collided with at speed, and replaying the original GTAs has reminded me that Rockstar weren't thinking of any of this stuff back then. If we're talking across the board physics applied to driving though, and the amount of detail in AAA titles where GTA 5 lets you manually move the sunroof or San Andreas lets you pop hydraulics on a lowrider, should you have the option to strap in if you're planning a speedier getaway, or is that just too lame? Number 4. Most cover wouldn't protect you. No, some games have acknowledged the harsh reality of most objects in the world not stopping bullets by making it part of gameplay. Call of Duty Vanguard encourages you to shoot through walls more than ever. Overall though, guns are incredibly powerful, and depending on what the gun is and the ammo used, the stopping power will vary considerably. In video games case, when was the last time you fired something that didn't feel like it could do damage? That increasingly aluminium car you've hopped behind doesn't have the strength to shield you from a hail of bullets. In fact, the engine block is the only part of it that would stop a bullet. Just don't expect to drive it afterwards. If a car won't be able to offer protection in a firefight, an overturned table or some office furniture would get shredded. For a playable version of all this, check the immaculate Max Payne 3, where Rockstar essentially applied what would become Red Dead 2's level of detail to an awesome third-person shooter. Number 3, injuries. This is a weird line to walk. I personally remember Peter Molyneux addressing the fact characters don't get injured in games in the run-up to Fable 2. It's why that game never actually kills you and instead just gives you a scar or some sort of permanent mark when you run out of health, letting you get back up but also visibly showing that combat-worn history over time. Honestly though, how many games deal with injuries? In Metal Gear Solid 3, it could become a nightmare of digging out a bullet every time you got shot, and go one step further and suddenly you're in Far Cry 2 realms of guns jamming and having to take your malaria tablets to make it to the next checkpoint. Naughty Dog's answer in Uncharted's case was actually fascinating, saying that Drake is never really taking damage when the screen starts losing color and going red. Instead, that's a representation of his luck running out. When Nate actually gets hit, he goes down, because bullets in that franchise are actually bullets. Transplant across to something like phenomenal tactics shooter Hell Let Loose though, and bullets being bullets means you need medical aid in an instant if you're standing in the wrong place. Maybe it would simply be too gruesome or anti-gameplay to render or even acknowledge injuries, but considering how much something like The Last of Us is brutally realistic, Joel and Ellie can both soak up hundreds of bullets from beginning to end. Number 2, crowds aren't crowds. The main focus of sports games is, unsurprisingly, recreating the sport itself. Depth of tactics, play styles, physics, etc. are all integral for these games to work. Likewise, generating the atmosphere of these events is also hugely important for any competitive sports title to be effective. While the likes of in-game commentary and the sounds of crowds have improved significantly over the years, the spectators themselves still remain pretty flat and lifeless, with no real glut of animation to convince you there are hundreds or thousands of people watching your every move. Whether it's the same handful of characters performing the same animation over and over again, crowds just don't behave like normal human beings. Big old nerdy gaming question here, but which game has the best crowd, where it actually feels like part of the experience and not just a copy-pasted set of NPCs? And number 1, you wouldn't hear gunfire until after the bullet hits. Another misconception about the laws of physics that we can attribute to Hollywood. Every time a gun is fired on screen, the gunshot is heard before we hear the sound of the bullet hitting its target. However, this is the reverse of what would actually happen. Because bullets travel faster than the speed of sound, the bullet would hit its target before the sound of the gunshot is heard. You can really pick up on this at longer distances. The trope has found its way into the world of video games for decades, but at least for us, there's a logical gameplay reason for it to exist. Sound feedback. When we play something, sound is used to provide feedback for player interactions, and to let us know that we've done something in a game. If there was no immediate audio feedback to our in-game actions, there would be a disconnect between us and our characters. In this case, if you change the order of firing and response around, it would totally break the feel of every online shooter and everything else.
Now, video games today contain a lot of details. In fact, that's actually some of the selling points of these titles in the first place. But sometimes we should never, ever, under any circumstances, actually take a good look at them, because you know what? They are downright horrifying, disgusting, and in some cases, just plain weird. So let's, ironically, then take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 tiny video game details you don't want to see. Number 10, Resident Evil 4, the creepy credit sequence. Resident Evil 4 certainly isn't a feel-good experience at the best of times. It's a story of nefarious plots, horrific parasites, chainsaw-brandishing foes, and robe-wearing masterminds that morph into huge, dreadful, pus-leaking spiders. And yes, there is only one of the latter, but one is more than enough. And upon reaching the end of this grim extravaganza, the credits that unfold are possibly the creepiest thing in the entire title. Through a series of still images accompanied by haunting music, we see a little of the origins of the Ganado, shadows. Sadler is seen to arrive in the village and the parasites are introduced. The locals are horribly infected, and it's suggested in one or two of the images that the children of the village are then killed by them. Upon arriving in the village and expecting some of their homes, Leon Kennedy poses what the people have been eating. In light of these sorts of things, it's probably best not to dwell on that. Number 9. Final Fantasy IX. Vivi's grandfather was going to do what? Final Fantasy IX is, on the surface, a rather whimsical and charming game. It has a cartoonish storybook aesthetic and a very colourful cast of characters. At the same time, though, it tackles some dark themes of existential crisis, megalomaniacal tyrants, and the nature of what it means to be human. But fans may not have noticed one of the more hidden creepy moments in this classic title. In Quan's dwelling, a hidden cave located in the forest near Treno, Quan has actually written something very incriminating on the wall. Measuring Vivi's height, he writes, "6 weeks since I adopted Vivi, still too small to eat." Later, Vivi comments that his grandfather, the person that adopted him, often expressed concern about how he was growing, and now we know why. It's a tiny detail, but it's quite a dark and jarring one. Number 8. Pokemon Gold and Silver, the Slowpoke Tail Frenzy. Pokemon fans will be familiar with the water and psychic type critter Slowpoke. It's adorable looking, boasts a solid special attack, and is a solid tank. But what else is popular about Slowpoke? Well, in the Pokeverse, it's tasty tails, sadly. Franchise fans will also know of the widely reported deliciousness of the Slowpoke tail, as is seen in unpleasant detail in Pokemon Gold and Silver. The player must derail Team Rocket's cruel scheme to capture numerous Slowpoke in order to get their hands on this valuable commodity. The creatures are famous for their delayed reactions to pain and general unawareness, but that's no excuse. Considering that they need their tails to evolve, a shelter clamps down on them and then Slowbro is born, and the fact that they dip them into rivers to catch fish means that they need those tails far, far more than we ever will. As Bulbapedia reports, the Slowpoke tail is actually an item that can be acquired in Pokemon Gold and Silver and their remakes. Its Japanese name translates to delicious tail, and it exists purely to be sold in the game's stores. And that says a lot about the Pokemon world's prioritization of profit, even if Slowpoke's tails do fall off and regrow. Still grim. Number 7. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, the horrible sadism of the All-Night Mask. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is rather infamous amongst Nintendo fans. Just one look at the moon's horrific face would be enough to convince you that this game is a little more frightening than Zelda tends to be, and the more you see, the more this impression seems to be reinforced. Of course, the game is more about a distinctively creepy vibe than outright in-your-face horror, but the series does a fantastic job of guiding the player without the overbearing hand-holding Nintendo can sometimes offer. Gossip stones and the like can help lead Link along, but behind such a stone is a scary hint indeed. Of the many, many masks our hero can don throughout this adventure, one is known as the All-Night Mask. It isn't the most crucial one, but it does have its uses. Link can, for instance, listen all the way through a certain pensioner's rambling stories while wearing it, as it prevents him from falling asleep. The trouble is, it can also prevent the wearer from ever sleeping again. A gossip stone hidden away in the game casually informs the player that this ghastly object is actually used to torture victims. Yeesh. Number 6. Splatoon 3. The grim fate of the super sea snails given to merch. Now, Splatoon is basically a competitive shooter that only Nintendo could have made. It's bold, brash, brightly coloured, and a riot of high-octane fun. And it's certainly a very competitive experience, but gritty and bloody it is absolutely not. The zany world of Splatoon seems to be occupied solely by a range of anthropomorphic sea creatures, from fellow players inhabiting the hub world to the merchants that run the shops. And one of the handy NPCs around is Merch, who can order gear for you, add ability slots to it, re-roll existing slots, and much more and so on. And if you're serious about creating a build for your favourite weapons and playstyles, you'll spend quite a bit of time with Merch, and quite a lot of super sea snails, the currency that is acquired from partaking in Splatfest events. But sadly, said super sea snails are alive, and Merch has a rather sinister purpose in mind for them. As noticed by some eagle-eyed players who zoomed in the camera at an awkward angle, Merch has several of these snails de-shelled in his briefcase, and they tremble at the sight of him, the ravenous fiend. Number 5. Bloodborne, the sad fate of Yosefka. When our hapless hunter first awakens in the grim world of Yharnam, they soon find that friends are rather hard to come by. Everybody they encounter encounter seems to want to kill them, and the very few early game exceptions include Gilbert, the kindly-sounding ailing man in the window, and Yasefka. Yasefka too has a benevolent tone. She wishes the hunter well, but apologizing most profusely, refuses them refuge in her clinic. Her patients must remain safe from outside infection. A little later, however, she has completely changed her tune. She asked the hunter to send people to her so that she might save them. In true From Software fashion, this NPC has sinister, veiled intent, because you see, an imposter has taken the original's place. But what becomes of the real Yasefka and the imposter's other victims if they're sent to her? Well, by finding a hidden passage in the Forbidden Woods, it's possible to gain access to the clinic again. Here, before defeating Rom the vacuous spider, you'll find the original Yasefka, transformed into a celestial minion by the hideous experimentations of the imposter. The imposter can be fought as an optional mini-boss, and after the Blood Moon, if she isn't killed prior, she will seemingly be impregnated by a Great One, as indicated by her position on the operating table and her pained yet enraptured words. Number 4. Metal Gear Solid: Johnny's Toilet Troubles. Metal Gear Solid fans will be familiar with Johnny Sasaki, the guard who suffers all manner of misfortunes throughout the series. In the classic PlayStation title Metal Gear Solid, Johnny is the unfortunate victim of Meryl's uniform thievery. He's seen completely naked, though censored, in a less than dignified position. But dignity doesn't appear to be much of a concern for old Johnny here, because later in the game, after the infamous torture sequence, he is the designated guard of Solid Snake's cell. While on the job, he's seen to complain of a stomachache, which unfortunately for him ends in the way that most stomach pains often do, with a desperate dash to the toilet. This only happens, however, if Snake does not knock him out on a successful escape. It's a very Hideo Kojima thing to have the character hold his stomach and hurry off in such hilarious fashion, and the detail actually goes a step further, because you see, Snake can follow him and knock on the bathroom door, the only result of which being a pained groan from the occupant. Number 2. Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag: Some very graphic skinning of animals. Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag is amongst the most celebrated entries in the storied franchise. It offers a vast open world to sail across, a variety of different sized islands to explore, and of course a robust system of upgrades to collect for both Edward and his beloved Jackdaw. To scavenge and salvage many of the required items for these upgrades though, the local wildlife Edward encounters often has to be killed. This isn't uncommon in such titles. Resources must be gathered after all, but the process of killing such animals, particularly small harmless ones like monkeys, isn't really for the squeamish. When an animal is killed or incapacitated for skinning, the camera helpfully cuts away during the act. After said resources are gathered, however, the grisly remains of the poor creature are left where the deed was done. Combine this with the fact that bones are required to craft blow darts, and that whale hunting is a long, protracted affair where harpoons leave deadly marks, and that the bloody body of the beast is then hauled up onto the ship at the end, and you've got a title that can be an awful lot to stomach. And number 1, Triangle Strategy: A Love Affair That Never Was. Through the course of Square Enix's SRPG Triangle Strategy, the player will, as is par for the course in such titles, encounter a wide range of different characters, many of whom are optional and can join your ranks if the right conditions are met. And one such character is Archibald, a veteran archer who fought in the infamous Saltiran War. Battling for the Holy State, he's become enamored by a female general of his enemy, and expresses his wishes to meet her again on joining the ranks. As luck would have it, said general, Groma, is another elderly fighter who can join the player's army if their convictions are high enough, and on acquiring both units, players may have hopes that the two would acknowledge their shared past or even begin a relationship. Sadly though, they just stand feet apart at the camp after their recruitment and nothing happens. Lore-hungry players will notice occasional references to each other though, such as Groma mentioning that she'd like to get to know the sundry shop owner a little better, and this was a real heartbreaker.
We're all across scary games being scary, but developers seem to have realized they don't necessarily need to be making a horror game to include a serious creep factor. Sometimes that creep factor isn't even all that obvious. In fact, having to dig for a spooky video game detail can make it all the more unsettling, like trying to figure out why that horrifying image file is in the game, what happens when you wander through a swamp at 3 AM in a Western open world game, or what famous video game enemy has a dark and distressing hidden secret. Well, I'm here to answer all those questions for you, so I hope it's daylight out, and if it's not to worry, we're in this together. Right? Okay, cool. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are 10 creepy video game details that'll give you the chills. Number 10, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Alien TV broadcast. Doubling down on my comment that you can find a creepy moment even in the brightest, bubblegummiest of games, Animal Crossing New Horizons proves that even it can bring on the supernatural. If you can drag yourself out of bed at the ungodly hour of 3:30 on a Saturday morning to boot your Switch, you can wait 3 minutes and then potentially freak yourself out. At precisely 3:33 AM for exactly 1 minute, the TV in your home will display static and then an alien figure who appears to speak to you. That's your Animal Crossing home, not your real home. If you're dying to check this one out but you don't want to be up at 3 in the morning, you can of course just change the date and time on your console. Number 9. Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, PT transmissions. This will be the first ghost on this list, but certainly not the last. Unless you've been living under a rock, chances are you're pretty across PT, the playable teaser for Hideo Kojima's now cancelled horror game Silent Hills. Well, before he had a nasty split with Konami, the mastermind behind Metal Gear Solid put a PT Easter egg in Metal Gear Solid 5. During Mission 20, clever players could happen upon a radio broadcasting a pretty nasty report. It details a grisly series of events where a man murdered his whole family. PT fans will recognize this as the same broadcast that plays out in the Silent Hills demo. Does this mean Snake exists in the Silent Hills universe and could have taken the spooky ghost Lisa out before she scared the pants off us? We can only hope. Number 8. PT. Lisa's got your back. Since we're already talking PT, let's go over one of the most interesting and horrifying video game details that might actually make you happy you're super unlikely to ever play this demo again. Lance McDonald, an Aussie streamer, hacker, and friend of mine, dug through the PT build and discovered something genuinely freaky. As soon as you pick up the flashlight, Lisa actually attaches to your back, which explains why you think you can hear her following you through the endless hallway loop. Because she is. Constantly. I guess except for when she's on the second landing, or slamming the door of the bathroom, or standing in the window. But there's the lowdown for you, if you wanted to make a horrifying game more horrifying for some reason. Number 7. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Beware the Weeping Angels. Don't blink. Blink and you're dead. That's the golden rule when dealing with the Weeping Angels, an enemy made famous on Doctor Who. You see, the Weeping Angels appear as statues which move when you're not looking at them, thus the whole don't blink thing. They're actually not statues, they're a species of super powerful quantum-locked humanoids, but look, we probably don't have to get into that right now. Clearly somebody at CD Projekt Red is a Doctor Who fan. After completing the Monster in the Cemetery quest in The Witcher 3, you can return to the church near Lindenvale where Geralt appears upon some spooky angel statues. Entering and leaving the church, perceptive players notice the angels change position, move toward the door, and then entirely vanish if you continue to look away and turn back. If this series of events sounds familiar, it may be because Dishonored also incorporated the creeptastic angel beasties. Number 6. Super Mario Galaxy 2 Spooky Cliff Figures. Most of these creepy video game details have some kind of reasonable explanation behind them. This one doesn't, and even though it's in a Mario game, that somehow makes it so much more unsettling. In Shiverburn Galaxy and a section of the Grandmaster Galaxy in Super Mario Galaxy 2, you can spot some ghostly figures peering down at you from a cliff. The black figures have weird hollow eyes and can't be accessed as they're part of the game's sky model. The texture's called Hell Valley Sky Tree. It's been speculated that hell may be referring to heat, specifically lava, as Shiverburn Galaxy is called Frozen Lava Galaxy in the game's final Japanese release. Suffice it to say, the figures are particularly freaky, especially in the whimsical modern classic platformer, and Nintendo has never discussed them publicly, so your guess is as good as mine here. Number 5. Fatal Frame. Idle hands get spooked. The Fatal Frame series is already chock full of terrifying foes, chilling circumstances, and encounters sure to get you checking under the bed at night. But don't worry, the developers implemented a feature to make sure that even putting the controller down wouldn't get you away from the frights. If you try to give yourself a breather from fallen broken neck lady ghosts and tiny grudge girl looking ghosts, you'll find yourself thoroughly punished. Leaving the screen idle for around 5 minutes causes disturbing ghostly faces to appear. Depending on the entry you're playing, you might get horrifying flickering demonic visuals, frantic whispering, or disembodied crying. It's enough to make your skin crawl while you were innocently trying to refresh your drink. Exceedingly uncool. Number 4. Red Dead Redemption 2 Old West Ghosts. Take a mosey down any back road at a certain time of night in Red Dead Redemption 2 and there's a decent chance you'll happen across something creepy. If you played Red Dead Redemption 2, you'll understand that I probably could have filled out this list from examples from Rockstar's latest Old West adventure. between man-made mutants, werewolves, unsettling pagan rituals, a literal ghost train, and a man insisting he's the devil, Red Dead 2 has plenty of disturbing secrets to be uncovered by those who put in the effort to find them. Perhaps the freakiest is the ghost of Agnes Dowd. Reverend Swanson may be an unreliable drunk, but in the case of his tale of Agnes Dowd, he's right on the money. Pop down to the Lemoyne swamps in the dead of night, and you may be lucky or unlucky enough to hear a woman's cries. If you want to be a classic horror movie teen, you can follow those cries and spot a ghostly apparition, none other than Agnes Dowd. If you stand back, you can see the tragedy that befell Agnes, and it's genuinely one of the creepiest and saddest encounters in the game. Number 3, Portal 2, Ratman's Den. There's a lot going on in the world of Portal. The cake is a lie, Companion Cube is adorable, GLaDOS is a potato, and Aperture Science is certifiably nuts. Ignore the t-shirt. On top of all that, you've got Ratman's Den, the home of Doug Ratman, who first uttered the phrase, "the cake is a lie." You can find his scribblings in hidden rooms scattered throughout Portal and Portal 2, clearly moving between them to avoid GLaDOS. You probably already had your suspicions about GLaDOS, but Ratman's investigation really takes the cake. Sorry. His writing describes the series of events where GLaDOS murdered almost everyone in the Aperture facility with nerve gas, and tortured all the survivors with constant tests, leaving only Shell as the sole living test subject. Number 2, Grand Theft Auto 5, Mount Gordo's Haunting. Rockstar games always seem to have room for enigmas of the mystical, and perhaps one of the best comes within Grand Theft Auto 5. Much like Rockstar's other ghostly entry on this list, the story of Jolene's untimely death is equally tragic and creepy. Turns out Jolene and her husband Jock got in a spat about whether they should leave Blaine County so Jock could pursue his stuntman dreams. The argument grew particularly heated as the couple climbed Mount Gordo. Jock lost his temper and shoved his wife over the cliffs. Though Jock was arrested, he was later let go as the investigation settled on the death being an accident. If you head up to the peak between 11 and 12 at night, you can spot Jolene's ghost with a terrifying gaping expression. The rock beneath her spirit also has the word Jock scrawled on it in blood, clearly trying to avenge the injustice over her murder. Number 1, Half-Life 2, The Secret of Headcrab Zombies. You'd absolutely know about one of the most iconic enemies in video game history, but you may not know the secret behind them. You will in a minute, so stick with me. It makes sense that when you see a headcrab latched onto a humanoid form shambling towards you, you'll want to shoot at it as much as you can, as fast as you can. No judgment. But you might want to listen a little closer to the creepy noises they make. It may seem like it's just standard garbled howling, but played backwards, they're somehow more horrifying. Turns out the creatures are actually crying out, "Help God, help," exclaiming "why," and calling out in agony. This seems to suggest that beneath that nasty head crab that appears to have eaten a humanoid's head is a person begging for your help. Yeesh.
Now, while many video games often end up feeling formulaic and full of the same systems and mechanics that you've seen dozens of times before, there are some games that contain unique details that really ground you in the experience, and some can be easily missed by many players and titles that reward those aiming to seek out every inch of the world that they find themselves in. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 seriously immersive video game details you missed. Number 10. Filling the car at the petrol station. Mafia 1 and 2. The Mafia trilogy contains many impressively realistic details across its 3 titles, from the radio distorting when driving through a tunnel to receiving a fine if you let the police pull you over after driving past them with no regard for the speed limit. Although not found in the 3rd game, one of the most immersive features found in the series is the ability to refuel your vehicle, with a well-hidden gauge on the HUD indicating when it's time to take a trip to the petrol station. Cars will slow down significantly as your fuel gets lower, with some higher-powered vehicles taking less time to deplete their reserves than other, more pedestrian cars in the series. While it is entirely optional due to the fact that you can simply steal another car, the fact that this detail exists is just one example of how the series attempts to present a more grounded and realistic world for the player to experience, and gives the players the ability to keep their favourite cars well looked after if they so choose. Number 9. Counting ammo. King Kong. Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie, yes, that is the actual title, may have aged considerably since its 2005 release, but it did make some rather interesting design choices. Although you can play as Kong during a few chaotic levels, the game mostly follows protagonist Jack Driscoll as he attempts to survive the perils of Skull Island. The lack of a HUD seriously adds to the dread the player experiences as they traverse this island, facing off against monsters that Jack is woefully unequipped to face at all. A side effect of this lack of on-screen information is that the player can't actually see how much ammo they've got remaining for their weapons, with Jack instead commenting on the magazines available to him. While the player can trigger these calls at any time, it raises the tension during combat, especially as ammo is quite rare and feels very different to the tendency of other first-person shooters to place an ammo counter on screen. Jack also shouts midway through combat scenarios when he needs to reload. Another use of the feature that feels incredibly immersive while also somewhat raising your pulse. Number 8. Sandbags can lose their sand. Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. Now, there are some subtle touches in games that really make a particular set piece memorable once you've seen them, and one such detail can be found during one of Uncharted 4's many excellent combat sections halfway through the story. You see, towards the end of Chapter 11, protagonist Nathan Drake comes face to face with an armoured truck with a particularly lethal turret. Dodging between cover, you'll eventually come across some extremely well-placed sandbags, offering a much-needed buffer between Drake and the relentless gunfire. Unfortunately, this cover doesn't last very long, with the onslaught of bullets gradually emptying the sandbags. Now, it's easily missed if you're focusing solely on the next point to run to, but it's an example of the kind of attention to detail that we've come to expect from developer Naughty Dog. Drake even drops to a lower crouch position as the bags begin to empty, and he becomes more exposed, further increasing the sense of danger as the turret rains fire down upon him. It's a moment that stands in contrast to the cool and calmer manner in which Drake usually deals with being fired upon, and gives the player an added sense of realism during this particular gunfight. Number 7. Real-time weather effects. Days Gone. Now, despite some problems, Days Gone is ultimately an underrated title. The 2019 zombie shooter suffered from a bloated length and some rather uninspired choices when it came to the story, but it does make some bold decisions too, with some of them feeling incredibly immersive. Needing to refuel the bike, for example, gives you a stronger sense of danger when outside of the camp, and helps the experience of driving around the world feel more grounded in reality, while the guitarist that you can occasionally spot busking in Iron Mike's camp makes Days Gone feel more alive. But weather effects are the most impressive example of this though, with puddles forming due to rain and snow settling in real time. Watching snow fall to the ground offers a sense of serenity that contrasts quite heavily with the carnage found amongst the constant threat of freaker hordes, and is an extremely effective tool in heightening feelings of immersion while playing. The weather also affects how the freakers react to you, with the cold temperature during snowfall increasing their strength, whilst heavy rainfall impairs their ability to see you and allows a stealthier approach to combat. Number 6. Sleeping is very important. Kingdom Come Deliverance. Historical accuracy and realism are values that most games fail to achieve, either through it not being something translatable to a mass audience or just because the developers instead aim their focus elsewhere. But Kingdom Come Deliverance goes further than most titles in this regard, with some of the most realistic and true-to-life gameplay seen in a video game. Now, sure, some of it doesn't translate too well, but the level of commitment to deliver on this front is definitely admirable. A key example of how far Kingdom Come Deliverance goes in the name of realism can actually be found when attempting to save your game. Now, sleep is tied to the save mechanic, giving it a stronger sense of importance than you'd find in your average game. The game contains a meter telling you when protagonist Henry is too tired, and failure to raise this meter by going for some well-needed shut-eye results in some inconvenient debuffs. The need to sleep makes you plan your days before finding an inn to rent for the night, which contributes heavily to its sense of immersion. And better beds give you better quality of sleep as well, so choosing where you sleep is important for avoiding trouble with certain enemies. Number 5. Yuri Lowenthal recorded his lines twice. Marvel's Spider-Man. Marvel's Spider-Man is widely considered amongst the best Spider-Man games ever, and is arguably one of the greatest Marvel games ever made. The plot and characters are superbly written, with excellent combat and visuals representing developer Insomniac at the top of their game. The 2018 title also contains some rather neat touches to really hammer home the immersion as well, something not at the forefront when considering the accomplishments of the game, but it is definitely there. For example, Peter Parker's voice actor Yuri Lowenthal recorded all of the web-slinger's dialogue twice, once once for instances where Spider-Man is not moving, and once for times when he's swinging, fighting, or otherwise exerting himself. It creates an effect that is ultimately subtle until you notice it, after which time it becomes difficult not to test it out during the many phone calls that Spider-Man takes throughout the game. Its subtlety also speaks to how effective it is though, with both sets of dialogue seamlessly triggering at the point that they are needed. It's extremely impressive and an example of one of the best studios today working their magic. Number 4. Cloud patterns and weather are accurately mapped. Gran Turismo 7. The Gran Turismo series is renowned for pushing the boundaries of what is possible in the racing genre. Across 8 mainline releases spanning multiple decades, the series has become known for its simulation-heavy focus and its ability to innovate and improve on its features. And one such innovation came in the latest in the series, GT7, which boasts some impressive attention to detail surrounding its cloud mapping and weather effects. Tracks in the games have been given cloud formations that are specific to the country that the track can be found in, with the developers using meteorological data to accurately map them as close to real life as possible. Different weather and climate conditions have also been designed closely to match those found in real locations, with these conditions having a large effect on how the tracks themselves feel to race on. Many of these effects happen in real time as well, with tyre wear and the effectiveness of slipstream changing to suit the weather conditions at any given time. It's a level of detail that is rarely seen in any game, let alone one with racing as its focus, and is an extremely immersive touch that elevates GT7 beyond many of its peers. Number 3. Maintaining gas mask efficiency. The Metro series. Another video game series that really attempts to present the player with a believable world, the Metro franchise excels in making its characters feel alive and story feel genuine. There are many times throughout the series where smart choices in game mechanics and design make surviving in this post-apocalyptic wasteland feel particularly harrowing and very different to life within the confines of the Metro. One of the most effective methods of building both tension and immersion in the franchise while making the player feel like part of the world is the use of the gas mask. Not only does the player need to collect filters throughout the world in order to stop protagonist Artyom breathing in toxic fumes, but they also need to ensure that the mask is in good condition. Cracks appear in the visor when taking damage, and while this could have been included as a simple visual clue to represent overall health, it actually results in the filters being less effective, significantly raising the stakes until a new mask is found. Artyom can also wipe the visor when dirty, with the screen gradually becoming more obscured until cleaned. This is a simple detail, but one that dramatically improves the immersion of the first-person franchise. Rain also has a similar effect on the overall feeling of realism that the series tries to convey, with drops of water glistening over the visor until cleaned. It may seem like a relatively small part of the Metro series, but it really adds to the overall experience. Number 2. NPCs actually eat. Red Dead Redemption 2. It wouldn't be a list about immersive details in video games without mentioning the king of small details, Red Dead Redemption 2. From shrinking horse testicles to accurate lunar cycles, this game goes above and beyond in its pursuit of immersion. The 2018 title features some of the most sophisticated NPCs in gaming as well, which really helps bring the title to life. But one little-known inclusion in Red Dead Redemption 2 surrounds NPCs' eating habits, which is to say that they actually eat. Many games feature food items that disappear in one bite or never disappear at all despite the character clearly eating. This is largely because it would be a clear waste of resources to have food that disappears accurately when characters eat it, but if anyone was going to do that, Rockstar is definitely that person. You see, if you get close to an NPC while they eat, you can watch them gradually finish a plate of food, with bites from forks being consumed accurately and the plate gradually becoming clean in real time. Now this is pointless, sure, but it goes to show the extreme lengths that Rockstar will go to when considering immersion for their titles, and is a detail that most players will likely never notice. And number 1, The Archers, Ghost of Tsushima. Developer Sucker Punch delivered one of the most cinematic and jaw-dropping games of recent years with Ghost of Tsushima, a sprawling open-world set in feudal Japan during the Mongol invasion of the island of Tsushima. Sucker Punch went to great lengths to ground the player in this world, using historical elements while also putting their own creative spin on the title. And one of the enemy types in Ghost of Tsushima is the Archer, who can be found firing arrow after arrow at you from a relatively safe distance. Now, being that other Mongols are fighting you at close quarters, this could be problematic, although the Archers have a cunning solution. When fighting the Archers, the word dushu can be heard often, followed by the ducking of other Mongol soldiers within the vicinity. You see, it's actually a Mongol word, roughly translating to English as being duck. The fact that Mongol archers are warning other soldiers to avoid the incoming arrow using a Mongol term is an extremely immersive inclusion in the game. It also helps improve the player's perception of the enemy AI, giving them a more human-like quality as you fight them throughout this critically acclaimed title.
Now, there are great video games with very simple ideas on tiny budgets, and then there are games with enormous budgets and more incredible features and mechanics than you can shake a stick at. Do people still say shake a stick at? Let's bring it back. In the case of this list though, we're tucking into some of the minuscule details that developers added to their games that made them just so much better. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are 10 tiny details in games that made them so much better. Number 10. Lose an eye and the screen goes dark. Metal Gear Solid 3. Between the Metal Gear series and Death Stranding, there are so many options we could have picked for an entry on this list, but we're gonna go with Metal Gear Solid 3, where Snake loses his eye. When Big Boss lost his eye during an encounter with Ocelot in Operation Snake Eater, you'll notice the right side of the screen has a blacked out vignette, just like if you closed one eye. Like many of the things on this list, Kojima could have not done this and made just as excellent of a game, but to implement the visual distortion reflecting Snake's actual vision brings it to the next level. Reportedly, the 3DS port of the game even prevented the player from using the 3D depth slider when in third-person mode to reflect the loss of his eye. Since then, Life is Strange 2 and Inscription have both used the same feature to great effect, but kudos to Metal Gear Solid 3 for doing it first. Number 9. Edward Kenway's excellent animations. Assassin's Creed Black Flag. There aren't many AC fans who would argue that the characters, game world, and mechanics that make up AC Black Flag represent one of the series' best. Plenty of loving detail was clearly poured into the environments, the world design, geography, and vistas. But there were smaller things that made us care about Edward Kenway and his journey too, one of which is a tiny little detail connected to the way we watch our protagonist move about the world. In what is another brilliant example of something that could have been done away with and created just as good of a game, the way Edward dynamically moves through water is lovely. Now, nobody would have batted an eyelid if the guy just used a slightly slower walk animation to move through water, but instead we got this. In certain situations, Edward will trail his fingers along the water, which will in turn leave noticeable trails behind him. It's something we see a lot now in games like The Last of Us and its sequel, where animations are lovingly nuanced and dynamic depending on the circumstance. But 8 years ago, this was mind-blowingly cool. Things like this may seem insignificant, but they really add to a player's ability to really appreciate the tranquility and detail in the game world. Number 8. The animal ecosystem. Red Dead Redemption 2. Much like plenty of the other games on this list, Red Dead Redemption 2 is positively littered with tiny details that enhance the game world and your experience. In lieu of mentioning that horse balls shrink in the cold, I've gone for an option that's a little more discreet, but not to worry, I do have a crude one later down the list. The systems at play beyond your third-person cowboy sightline in Red Dead Redemption 2 are sprawling and incredibly well developed. The intricacies behind how the game world functions don't stop at the daily routines of NPCs. They also extend to the game's fauna. The animals in Red Dead 2 actually hunt each other. While occasionally Arthur finds himself on the wrong end of a crocodile, it's more often they'll take their snacks in the form of smaller, less gun-toting prey like boars. Take a moment in any part of the game world and you might see cougars stalking and attacking deer, among any number of other interesting animal interactions that have nothing to do with your personal journey. It's this feature and many others like it that make this particular digital pocket of the Old West a wildly addictive playground. Number 7. GTA knowing you better than you know yourself. Grand Theft Auto 5. Sometimes the best tiny details in games aren't complex systems or gorgeous animations, but instead incredibly niche additions that indicate the developers just really get you. This is one such example. In GTA 5, while playing as Trevor, you can head on over to Michael's gorgeous house and, if you like, aim an RPG at it and start firing a ton of rockets. Is this a really specific thing to do? Yes, it is. Did players do it anyway? You betcha. Did Rockstar suspect they would? Apparently. Fire off a good handful into the side of Michael's mansion and you'll get a call from the man himself yelling at you to, quote,
"Stop firing rockets at my house!"
The amount of thought that went into recognizing players would do these things and how much joy it would bring them to record voice lines and interactions related to such specific events is why GTA is so beloved, and probably why it stood the test of time for 8 years. Number 6. An interconnected world, Xenoblade Chronicles. Xenoblade Chronicles may not be the only game that lets you see other parts of the game world from disconnected locations, nor is it the only game that features an interconnected landscape, but it combines the two in a really awe-inspiring way. Essentially, the game takes place on the bodies of two enormous titans, which makes being able to see different parts of the traversable world pretty damn remarkable. At one point, you might be on the Titan's knee and you can turn around and see the other Titan's sword above you. This is all the more interesting because it won't be until tens of hours later that you'll find yourself on the sword, and you can look back and see the spot on the knee you'd been standing on. The developers had to model with clay to figure out how these interconnected environments and terrain would look, and what the player should be able to see from each area. The result is gorgeous and gives you a real sense of wonder that plays into the game beautifully. Even when you realize one of the most gorgeous parts of the game, the sartorial marsh, is on the Titan's butt. Number 5. A literal poop, Dark Souls. I understand I've been going on a tangent about how so many of these details can be these game-affirming, incredible, beautiful additions, and now I'm talking about a poop, but bear with me. The chosen undead may have been cursed with the dark sign to never die, is forced to face unimaginable odds in battle, and navigate a nightmarish world, but a hero's still gotta go. The entire Soulsborne series is full of enchanting and horrifying little details ready to unveil themselves to particularly observant players. It may not be the most haunting example, but plenty of players were suitably impressed by the decision of some From Software developer to 3D model a poop into a pot in the chosen undead cell. You have to maneuver the camera just so in order to see it, but it is indeed there, and it answers that question you may or may not have had. Even if you think this one is a little bit silly, it does do a really good job of representing the extreme attention to detail that the developers had when creating this game world. And it's that very attention to detail in every part of the game that's made the series such a smash hit. Number 4. Codsworth Calls You By Your Name, Fallout 4. Since we're rolling through entries of cool tiny details that could have been done away with and players would have been none the wiser, this is an especially cool thing Bethesda decided to put time into. Cast your mind back to 2015 and you might have found yourself booting Fallout 4, ready for a dense RPG adventure, naming your character your own name, something stupid or something very serious, and prepping yourself for the wasteland. It was to many players' great surprise then when your domestic model Mr. Handy calls you by that very name. Now, this isn't a name you picked from a pre-recorded name list. It just so happens that the robot was programmed with over 900 names. Now we're firmly in the year of Google Home and Siri, this is a bit less impressive, but at the time it was very exciting. Including this feature at all was totally unnecessary, but a fun addition to fleshing out what was at the time the newest RPG romp from Bethesda. Initially, there was some drama over the name Kyle being left out, but a 2016 update addressed that to the relief of Kyles everywhere. There's also Erectus, Arseface, and Bacon if that's more your speed. Number 3. Weapon upgrade animations, The Last of Us 2. There are some things we've just accepted as automated in games. Upgrading a weapon usually just takes you to a menu where you navigate to your upgrade of choice and then hold a button for long enough to spruce up your gun, bow, what have you. Similarly, visiting a merchant usually just takes you to a menu where you pick what you want to buy and sell from a UI list. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with this. In fact, for the most part, it makes the whole process a lot more streamlined. But there are a couple of occasions where the rule has been broken to great effect. The first of which is in Red Dead Redemption 2, where shops actually feature the items up for sale on shelves, and you can buy them that way. There is a menu available too in the form of a catalog on the counter, but it's all a far cry from a basic list of text or small images showing available goods. Similarly, The Last of Us 2 takes weapon upgrading to the next level with realistic animations, showing Ellie and Abby altering components of each weapon in real time. The animations, of course, aren't all perfectly realistic or flawless, but it does represent that attention to detail that's carried through the rest of the game. Number 2. Dangerous Wires, Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. This list is all about meticulous, generally unnecessary details that great games could have gone without, so yeah, Hideo Kojima is getting another look in. In this instance, we're taking a closer look at the power lines in the Phantom Payne, and so should you because they're a pretty handy tool. You can snap the lines by shooting them, which cuts the power to anything they're connected to. Additionally, if a soldier wanders into the vicinity of a fallen wire while it's raining in-game, they'll be electrocuted. The touch of realism is a nice inclusion, and given this game is all about adapting your approach through the deductions you've made by surveying your surroundings, having a new option to consider is a welcome addition. Number 1. Hallucinations. Batman Arkham Knight. There are so many little details enhancing the experience and game world in Arkham Knight, but we've boiled it down to just one, and that's the Joker hallucinations. Once the fear toxin is released in Arkham Knight, you might be able to notice plenty of little Joker hallucinations throughout the city. Your arch nemesis can be spotted in billboards and posters, on statues, and even projected over the Lady of Gotham herself. Some of these are really rare and can vanish in the blink of an eye, so it all does an extraordinary job of embedding you in Batman's psyche. Some players even reported noticing random thugs can resemble the Joker, though if they end the encounter, look away and look back, it turns out it was simply a regular non-Joker resembling thug. The implications here of where Batman is at and where the narrative is going are super interesting. These aspects and the technical achievements of the environment, plus Batman's cape animations and how it interacts with weather, all combine in a really satisfying way.
While it's hard to maintain a sense of authority across multiple expensive video games when development teams are often hundreds of people, there are scores of important talking points and pieces of lore tucked away in spin-offs. When PUBG and even Fortnite are slowly bulking themselves out with recognizable characters and interwoven story elements, you owe it to yourself to experience the essentials. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and these are 7 huge video game story details revealed in spin-offs. Number 7. Why Sub-Zero and Scorpion hate each other. Mortal Kombat Mythology's Sub-Zero. Mortal Kombat's iconic showdown between two palette-swapped ninjas has spanned over 25 years of mythology, to the point where it's just accepted that Sub-Zero killed Scorpion's family, Sorcerer Quan Chi was involved somehow, Scorpion then killed the original Sub-Zero, and that was that. Well, in the shockingly bad Mortal Kombat Mythologies, a god-awful action platformer where you play as Sub-Zero in between some of the best/worst live-action cutscenes ever, we actually spend time fleshing out this specific feud. Now, the whole thing was a retcon put in place to prep audiences for Mortal Kombat 4 that was arriving 1 year later on home console, but regardless, at least there was some sense of clarity to what went before. Turned out Sub-Zero was hired in secret by Quan Chi to retrieve a map that would lead to powerful Sorcerer Shinnok's amulet. Quan Chi also hired Scorpion for the exact same mission, then wiped out his clan while he was away, trading the bones for payment to Sub-Zero's master. As Sub-Zero killed Scorpion on the mission and the pair met back up in Netherrealm, i.e. Hell, Scorpion wrongly thinks that Sub-Zero also killed his clan, that Quan Chi is now his master, and proceeds to fight Sub-Zero for decades to come. Mortal Kombat 4's horrifically voiced and acted arcade endings follow on from this, but completely lack the key information setting up Scorpion and Sub-Zero's history. It wouldn't be until 2015's Mortal Kombat 10 and 2019's Mortal Kombat 11 that the wider Mortal Kombat fandom would be brought up to speed. Number 6. Seren wasn't crazy. Mass Effect Andromeda. The original Mass Effect remains a masterpiece in branching narrative pathways, letting you approach various key junctures in the story however you like. Certain alien races can be set free, characters live or die, and depending on how your Commander Shepard is spec'd, the final showdown against Saren can be bypassed altogether, providing you're Paragon/good enough to talk to the real him. For the latter, this required specific dialogue choices and hours of playing a certain way. But the talking point amongst fans, and one of the reasons Saren is such a memorable villain, is the discussion around how much the Reaper Harbinger was controlling him the whole time. In Mass Effect Andromeda then, talk to Avitus Rix after your main story encounter and he'll reveal that he actually worked alongside Saren years before the Reapers were on the case. Rix confirms many fans' perspective that the real Saren was worth saving, saying he was ruthless but not crazy, and that it was something more regarding his actions as a Spectre enforcing galactic rule that made him snap. Number 5. Jack and Kira finally kiss. Jak X Combat Racing. Something of a love story that was far from the focus across all the Jak and Daxter games. Look into the various scenes between Jak and Kira and you'll see Naughty Dog were building to a payoff between the pair. Twice over in Jak and Daxter and Jak 2, the pair go in for a kiss and Daxter interrupts them, either getting right between the two and telling Jak off, or being too much of a distraction. This later leads to Jak making out with Ashlyn, only for Jak 3 to abandon the arc altogether as Tara Strong didn't return to voice Kira and the character instead appeared largely mute. However, in Naughty Dog's final Jak game, Jak X Combat Racing, Jak and Kira get together at the very end, as a big fan-gratifying finale. Even Daxter refers to the moment as a photo finish. If you didn't play this Crash Team Racing style additional installment though, all that preamble was for nothing. Number 4. Why Big Boss lost faith in governments. Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. Maybe someday we'll get a Snyder Cut style re-release of Metal Gear Solid 5, as clearly Hideo Kojima was so close to the finish line, many in-progress final cutscenes were instead included on a bonus collector's edition. Still, the marketing and core thrust of the narrative centered around the notion of Big Boss completely separating from any sense of regional governmental authority. We're told in later games in the timeline that Big Boss was something of a nuclear weapon-equipped tyrant, and with trailers and marketing saying that MGS5 would be the missing link between the hero of MGS3 and the villain of what came after, Kiefer Sutherland's mostly mute Venom Snake almost stayed away from this subject matter entirely. For the answers, you had to venture onto former PlayStation Vita exclusive offering Peace Walker, the game that dove headfirst into Naked Snake's psyche after finding out the boss's mind had been recreated digitally to algorithmically decide when nuclear weapons should be fired. Yes, it's a Hideo Kojima game. Big Boss has a full-on meltdown dealing with killing his mentor all over again, and with the overriding sentiment of her teachings being that an enemy is only whoever your government points the finger at, it cements Boss as wanting to create a nation all his own, for soldiers all around the world. The boss being the ultimate manifestation of patriotism and sacrifice for your country is also key to everything that happens in Metal Gear Solid 4. However, without this wider context, Kojima's message is even harder to parse out. Geralt is a knight. The Witcher Tales Thronebreaker. Canon between the Witcher books and games is essentially that there is none. The games can be said to take place after the books, as Geralt is wounded so badly he loses all memory, but CD Projekt Red have then recreated specific questlines or character exchanges that Geralt has already been through. Regardless, CDPR's Gwent Field spin-off Thronebreaker, besides being a fantastic card-based tale on an adventure game, features Geralt in a brief but important cameo. Now, this game takes place before all three games, around the events of the Time of Contempt and Baptism of Fire novels if we're being fancy, but features Geralt helping out protagonist Queen Maeve, receiving a knighthood because of it. Whilst a neat fleeting appearance in Thronebreaker, the fact Geralt attained knighthood status before his amnesia could have helped him across those later games, when witches themselves are largely cast out of most conversations. Number 2. Why the villains matter in Halo Infinite. Halo Wars 2. At this stage, we all know the tale of Halo Infinite, the half-finished trailers, the promising gameplay demos, and the genuinely heartwarming old-school look to Master Chief, but as for villain Escharum, he was the laughingstock of an early trailer and little else. Whilst it's impossible to say how much of Infinite has been retooled or overhauled since original trilogy writer Joseph Staten came on board, any self-identifying Halo fan should know about Atriox and the Banished, the group of brute outcasts who Escharum mentions during this monologue. First appearing in Halo Wars 2 in a genuinely terrifying surprise attack, Atriox is one of the best Halo villains in the franchise. Ostensibly the Thanos of the piece in regards to being a calculating, intimidating warlord with a master plan, Atriox was cast out from even the Covenant themselves, only to survive his own execution and form the Banished, who newcomer Escharum now works with. Escherum's monologue refers to Atriox's will, but with the character not being confirmed dead at the end of Halo Wars 2, mainstream Halo fans could be about to go up against someone they'll never forget. And number 1, Kratos has a brother and it changes everything. God of War, Ghost of Sparta. For the vast majority of his character writing, Kratos is a lone wolf, a violent, out-for-himself tornado of decapitations fueled by the death of his family by his own tricked hand and on a mission to rid the world of gods because of it. In one of the 2 PSP God of War games though, Ghost of Sparta, developers Ready at Dawn were allowed to expand pretty meaningfully on Kratos by introducing his brother Deimos. Existing as the reason behind Kratos' iconic red marking, a tattoo self-inflicted as a reminder that his brother was taken when the pair were children, Deimos rounds out Kratos' motivations other than just sheer rage. We find out that Deimos was the other one Zeus and Gaia later refer to as who the entire franchise could have been about in God of War 3. And after Deimos is killed in Ghost of Sparta's final duel, a very somber, touching moment shows Kratos once again contemplating suicide and questioning what he's become. Lastly, it's because Deimos was Kratos' last tie to the mortal world that Athena could finally make him a god, as he appears in God of War 2. All of this expands and refines Kratos' motivations in ways the core series doesn't go anywhere near, and I'd still argue it's essential to the God of War canon both now and going forward.
The devil's in the detail. It's a saying which applies a lot to my life, especially my van, which literally has a picture of Lucifer eating the heart of a child on the side of it. Have fun animating that, you beautiful editor. But it's taken to crazy lengths when it comes to video games. After all, if you're working on a project for years at a time on just one facet in a large team, you're going to sneak a lot of bits and bobs into your section, aren't you? In fact, often there's so much detail that it's often unfortunately overlooked, or even turns out to be completely pointless. But that's not to say that taking out the old microscope and having a look at the minutiae of games isn't damn cool when you find these little nuggets. With this in mind, I'm Jules of WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 completely pointless video game details that will blow your mind. Number 10. Deadshot's name is written on all of the shell casings in Arkham Knight. Although his weapons are on display in the GCPD, Deadshot doesn't physically appear at all in Arkham Knight. However, that's not to say that the villain still doesn't have a hand in trying to take you down, as his name is engraved on all the RPG shells fired out by the tanks throughout the title. This is weird for a few reasons. One, Deadshot isn't really rich, so financing the other villains would be putting him seriously out of pocket. And two, he's a villain that prides himself on accuracy and personal killing, so a remote-controlled tank shell doesn't really seem to fit the bill. Then again, this might be a joke made by the devs or even the villains themselves, mocking his inability to end the Caped Crusader. Number 9. The coordinates on Black Ops 2's tactical insertions correlate with real-life locations. When it comes to Call of Duty, there are many things that you're going to have to juggle at once. Running, gunning, and a defense against your mummin, and therefore you're probably not going to notice a blink and you'll miss it detail when you use a tactical insertion. It turns out that the coordinates that show up on the tactical insertion gadget actually correspond with wherever the multiplayer map you're playing is geographically located. Changing depending on your location, you probably won't even notice the coordinates unless you freeze frame the split second that they're on screen. But that was enough for players to figure out that they were much more than just throwaway numbers, and were actually authentic to their location. Number 8. Individual raindrops get washed away in Drive Club. Now, it wasn't the best game by any stretch, but it was a beautiful one, including an incredible amount of detail being poured into the weather effects. This was actually upped post-release, as the devs added in an update which boosted weather effects massively. With the update, each individual droplet of rain was rendered as its own asset, having its own path to follow that could be impacted by wind and other environmental changes. Consequently, if you look closely enough, you can see each drop hit either the road or the car before splashing off. Likewise, when the window wipers are on, each droplet gets brushed to the side, leaving its own individual trail of water in the process. That is mad. Number 7. The eyes of horses in Assassin's Creed Origins reflect the world. Spending an extra year to focus on Origins was the right thing to do. Even if the game still suffered from a fair few bugs on its release, the game was for the most part absolutely gorgeous. And there are a bunch of little details that you probably missed while playing this game, from the way that the sand interacts with the wind to the direction of the water influencing your swimming speed, but some are so minute that it's a mystery why time was even put into creating them at all. By far the craziest feature is that the eyes of the animals, in particular horses and camels, actually reflect the world if you look closely enough. It's only a static image, but if you zoom in while using the photo mode, you'll be able to see the shine of the world in their eyeballs, reflecting even where the player is standing. Number 5. Realistic environments in Ubisoft games. Okay, so here's my take on Ubisoft. I believe that one day they will make the best game ever, but only because every other game they've made does one thing really well and not so much in all the other areas. That's just my opinion. It does seem, however, that environments are the one thing that Ubi is beginning to nail. As I said before, Assassin's Creed Origins had a beautiful world, Far Cry is always interesting to look at, and The Division was really impressive because of the way it handled snow. The snow was fully interactable and covered the environment in a realistic way. The way it would lay on cars was natural, and brushing up against these vehicles would cause the snow to be pushed off and fall to the floor. It's a super small touch in the grand picture of things, but it was much appreciated in an otherwise slightly dry shooter. Number 4. Geralt's beard grows as time passes in The Witcher 3. Weirdly enough, one of the biggest features talked about in the run-up to The Witcher 3 wasn't how expansive the game's open world was or how detailed the story was going to be, but how the main character Geralt's beard would grow as the RPG progressed. I bet Peter Molyneux felt that acorn turning into a tree bullshit more than ever because of this. Growing in different phases as time passed, if you spent too long wandering the wilds of the game's open world, you would go from cleanly shaven monster hunter to looking like, well, you spent weeks living off the land in the mountains. It doesn't really add anything to the grand scheme of things, but it's another reminder of how time doesn't stand still while you're out journeying through the world of The Witcher 3. Number 3, Uncharted 4's rocks have their own independent physics. Uncharted 4 is a visual powerhouse, but by far the most pointless and impressive little feature that the devs decided to include was the way that the rocks moved. While you can slide down certain contextual hills in Uncharted 4, the rocks that start crumbling all around you have their own physics systems. They aren't just an effect or one big texture, and if you decide to shoot them individually before you commit to a slide, you can watch them as they start to fall away and slide down the hill. It's a needless detail, but what's interesting is that this could be a leftover from an old prototype of the sequel, where shooting the environments to make climbable bullet holes, for instance, was intended to be a much larger part of the experience. Number 2, the ants in Skyrim. No matter your view of Skyrim, there's no denying that it created one of the most lifelike open worlds the industry has ever seen. It evolves whether or not you interact with the environment or not, and NPCs will go about their daily routines while you're out smashing vampires and bashing bandits. However, one of the biggest examples of Skyrim's living, breathing world is one you might need a magnifying glass to notice. Because if you look closely at certain parts of the environment, you'll be able to see a trail of ants, all of which have their own path and set routes going about their daily routine. That's right, not only do the people get on with their lives while you're not around, but even the ants as you carelessly tread all over them as well. It's weird to think that Skyrim as a place would just exist perfectly fine whether you were in it or not, which is kind of weird, like an existential crisis. Yeah, think about that the next time you boot it up. And number 1, Shenmue's weather was based on real-life forecasts from 1986. Long before the likes of The Elder Scrolls or GTA would get all the credit for doing the same thing, Shenmue was having the time of its life pioneering systems that would come to signify the open-world genre. There is, quite frankly, a preposterous level of detail in this game, but nothing beats the actual weather system options in the settings, which sees real forecasts from 1986 to 1987 Yokozuna, which is the area that the game is based in, used to dictate how the weather should be at any point in the game. The devs could have just put in any old weather system in place and it wouldn't have made a difference, but for some reason, almost as if they absolutely loved making their game, they thought that mimicking the actual forecast from the real world would make their game seem much more fleshed out.
You can always judge the quality of a game's world building by how much you care for the NPCs. Though some NPCs exist as nothing more than furniture, window dressing, or exposition dumps, the really good NPCs make you care about their existence, their preservation, their happiness, and that's normally because of solid writing, design, art, and animation. Whether that's a charismatic superstar like Mass Effect's Garrus, or the determined and powerful Tess from The Last of Us, a great NPC, if they're interesting enough, can sometimes eclipse the main character in terms of charm. I mean, how many times have we said, can we just get a game about this person instead? We spend tens of hours with these people, rank them, talk about our favorites, so it stands to reason that there's way more to the world of NPCs than you first thought. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video game NPCs with awesome details you totally missed. Number 10, the second pyramid head is Eddie's, Silent Hill 2. This one might still be open to interpretation, but such is the way all the best Silent Hills are written anyway. So, protagonist James Sunderland meets Eddie, a heavily bullied and mentally disturbed individual near the start of Silent Hill 2. Vomiting in a room next door to a mutilated corpse, James remarks that these people died unlike all of the other creatures he's encountered, and it's implied that Eddie actually murdered them. Pyramid Head then is a creature which feeds on personal guilt. James has it in spades, and so does Eddie. His thinly veiled apathy cracks several times during the game as he lashes out violently, not unlike James as well, before returning to eating some pizza. During a puzzle in the prison section, James notices that there are actually 2 pyramid heads on the plaque, despite only one pursuing him, and Eddie being the only other person who has seen one. Part of the puzzle includes plates depicting the oppressor, which is James, while the other is the glutton and the seductress. Given that the only other people we meet are Eddie, clearly a glutton for pizza, and Angela, a victim of sexual violence, someone who's already being punished, the second pyramid head is clearly Eddie's. Number 9, the salaryman with no job, Shenmue. When Shenmue arrived in 1999, it shook the foundations of gaming as a medium, and proved that a cinematic, believable, realistic human story could be told with, well, a ton of melodrama, but plausible melodrama. Part of what made Shenmue such an incredibly rich experience was that the NPCs are all unique and diverse. For example, the housekeeper Ine-san would wake up, go to the shrine and pray, then come home and clean your house. If you find yourself enjoying following NPCs around, you might notice Yoshikazu, a well-dressed salaryman who always seems to be on his way to work. Follow him though and you'll notice he never makes it to an office. He's just anxiously killing time before going home again. With enough uncovering, you discover he actually lost his job weeks ago, and now he's just too scared to tell his family. Ultimately, who wasted more time? Him or you following him around every day? Number 8. Cheeseburger and his diabetes. Far Cry 5. Far Cry 5 not being held up alongside 3 and 4 is a real shame, because it has some of the sharpest writing and expectation-subverting story design in the whole series. Also, it has Cheeseburger. Cheeseburger is an optional companion who also happens to be a big daft grizzly bear and a local attraction, raised as a show animal and given that name for having been found behind a local burger joint as a cub when his mum was killed by poachers. If you go to the venue that hosts Cheeseburger, you'll find out why he's on a diet. The patrons visiting his show would eagerly buy and throw double cheeseburgers to him, and now he has some pretty serious diabetes from all the gorging. To top that off, hidden audio logs reveal that he totally trashed his enclosure when being force-fed low-fat food instead. Number 7. Thirsty Squirtle Trainers. Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. The Pokemon games are no stranger to a pun, joke, or poor mistranslation, and their NPCs often ooze a quirky, barely understandable charisma fueled by all context going out the window. However, whilst most are innocent and borderline asinine, like the youngster who famously reminded you of how comfy and easy to wear his shorts were, Fire Red and Leaf Green are notable for having some truly odd examples of dialogue that just shouldn't be in a children's video game. Several female NPCs will insist that you go rest in their bed, please don't be shy, and another will challenge you to a fight for eyeing up his girlfriend. Though if you beat him, the girlfriend notes that they wish their boyfriend was as good as you. Whether tenuous, genuinely randy, or just a hilarious translation oversight, Pokemon's NPCs have only gone on to be more beloved for this stuff since. Number 6. Wheatley's plan was terrible by design. Portal 2. It's common for gamers to sing the praises of Portal and its sequel, but usually that's for a fantastic concept with spectacular execution and a cracking sense of humour. Though GLaDOS' voice actor Ellen McLean gave a superb and rightly respected performance, Stephen Merchant's Wheatley deserves to be up there alongside. I say this because though Wheatley's constant prattling in Portal 2 makes you laugh and gurn with frustration in equal measure, it plays perfectly into his designated purpose. He is the intelligence dampening sphere. In a few easily missable mentions, we discover that Wheatley's entire purpose was to quote-unquote generate a constant stream of terrible ideas to inhibit GLaDOS' intelligence, to stupefy and neuter her ever-growing cleverness before he was replaced by a morality core. Assumedly, the latter is a slightly less torturous option. So, though protagonist Shell is eager to escape and has no real option but to work alongside this babbling little orb, you kinda can't be too hard on him over time because he's actually trying to annoy you by design. Number 5. Andrew got his job through nepotism. The Star Fox series. In the Star Fox games, you'd be forgiven for thinking the connections between the characters would be threadbare at best. But no. Star Wolf, the bane of our heroes and the right-hand men of Andros, the game's antagonist, is a team made up of Wolf, Leon, Pigma, and Andrew. What you might know is that Andrew is Andros' young nephew, but what you might not is that he's actually a bit of a sycophant and a really terrible pilot. Andros appoints him to this crack team of evildoers just to get him out of his sight. After Star Fox though, you might notice Andrew isn't part of the Star Wolf squad anymore. Though you have to dive into comics and even a Smash Bros. Trophy description for the reason why, it appears Andrew was booted out for a terrible arrogant attitude and for trying to disobey orders. Without his enormous floating space ape uncle to cover for him, Andrew was out the door. Number 4. Mayor Lewis's secret affair. Stardew Valley. Most of the charm in the fantastic farming sim Stardew Valley comes from taking a busted up old farm and turning it into an agricultural Eden. Once you get past all the chopping, watering, and heavy-handed hoeing, there's actually a deceptively deep game of budding relationships to be had, as you try to endear yourself to a varied cast of characters. Some grow to like you with little to no big effort on your part, lapping up your presence like an excitable golden retriever. Others, however, will shrug off even the most elaborate gifts. You might give them a Lamborghini, but they just want some potatoes. Mayor Lewis then can be tricky to win over, but will be extremely grateful if you manage to find his lost purple boxer shorts, because he's somehow managed to lose them outside the town. You eventually find them in an eyebrow-raising kind of way in Marnie's bedroom, which if I was Jules Gill, I would say that someone got Stardew valeted. The best bit is if you decide to keep these shorts and then display them on your farm stall, Mayor Lewis gets furious and attempts to bribe you to keep quiet. Talk about a smoking gun. Number 3. The monk's fate could be even worse. Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. Sekiro is a game which is truly masterful at making you respect the presence of its characters. Death comes quickly, and as such, life is precious and fleeting. It's unwise to run headlong into a new character unless you want to end up as a blurry bloodstain on the floor. One such imposing presence is that of Kotaro, a huge burly-looking monk weeping under a tree. Up until this point, people of this stature have always been enemies, so you approach with caution, and if you've played Soulsborne before, this whole thing just screams trap. It turns out though that Kotaro is a gentle soul, and wants nothing more than a pure white flower to help him find his friends. You'll soon find out that he actually wants a pinwheel, and from here you have several options. Giving him what he wants allows you to spirit him away, and giving him a similar but incorrect item will let you encourage him to go work for a shady merchant. However, there is a third option. If you found the dodgy Dr. Dojun, you can lure Kotaro down where he'll do some unspeakable experiments on him instead. No, I didn't expect Sekiro to get that dark either. Number 2. Cat's Unfortunate Arm, Halo Reach. The poignant and powerful swan song of Bungie's Halo games, Halo Reach is so drenched in bravado and high-stakes adventure, you'd think this prequel was nothing more than an excuse to have more Spartans energy sword some Covenant. Instead, that was all a subversion, as Reach is easily the most emotive and detail-rich entry in the series. Noble team comprised of Carter, Emil, Jorge, Jun, Kat, and the Rookie, in their last-ditch attempt to save the UNSC fortress, attempt to stop the Covenant's relentless push across the galaxy. However, as they're picked off one by one, it becomes clear that the mission will not have a happy ending. When it comes to NPC details, I could talk about a bunch of different things, like how Jorge is the only big lumbering old school tank type person amongst them, but that his actual nature is way more like a gentle giant. One key detail so many people miss though is Kat's missing arm, and how it came to be lost. Though the official statement is that she lost it protecting Carter in the live action advert Deliver Hope, we clearly see her, arms intact, delivering a bomb to a Covenant ship, right after she's hit by a Banshee aircraft's bombs exploding against her forearm. It's a great overlooked bit of character detail and shows just how much she's been through to finish the mission at hand. Number 1. Fans hate Ashley but can't be without her, the Mass Effect series. Those of us who have played Mass Effect, which is to say the best of humanity, will have thought about all the various game and story changing decisions that come your way in each installment. Did I do the right thing? Did I honestly do all I could to save my friends? Was it really worth dooming my player character to death just for a bit of sexy time with that particular blue alien? Arguably the biggest decision to make in the first installment is which of your friends, Ashley or Kaidan, you intend to sacrifice on the planet Vermeer. One has to die, it's a real 50-50, so it makes sense to choose the one you like. Well, in opinion polls, the biotic officer Kaidan consistently scores higher in terms of general likability. He's just a more friendly, charismatic individual. The alternative though, Ashley is portrayed as a boorish, alien-hating space racist. Remarkably, though the fanbase has turned on Ashley over time, the vast majority of players opted to save her, and she even has the 4th highest survivability rate of the optional cast in the whole trilogy. Poor adorable human puppy-eyed Kaidan only survived in a meager 17% of total playthroughs.